What's good, folks? Family, friends, loved ones, enemies, frenemies, wizards, witches, muggles, mudbloods, people of Middle Earth to another episode of Disguise Coverage, the only podcast that gives you an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin and is presented by the best pizza in Buffalo, New York, and that is One Pie Pizza. You can find the online menu in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or whichever podcasting app or platform you are listening to this show on. I am your host, Anthony. Find me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro 2 ANT. In tonight's episode of Disguise Coverage, I am joined by one of my favorite guests, much like I was on last week's episode when I was joined by Bruce Nolan. And he called out in the beginning saying, like, oh, you got to be careful when you say like one of your favorite guests, because what happens if somebody calls you on it and then you got to rank them one day and you can get into the weeds with it. But my guest for tonight's show is genuinely one of my favorite guests and one of my favorite people as well, who will be diving into a really fun conversation that we have planned for this episode. I think a lot of the conversation come draft cycle and circles this time of year, especially when you get focused down to a team. A lot of it is just mock drafts and putting those pieces together. And I think that's fine and all good and well. But the conversation that myself and my guests are going to have tonight is kind of building the Bills draft board by breaking down the rest of the board in the first round, specifically those first 27 picks, and then kind of using that as a jump off platform in terms of how many positions are going to go and which players do we think go in those 27 picks, who's available at pick 28, breaking things down by position grouping and how that impacts the Bills at 28, which then impacts the Bills going forward throughout the entire rest of this draft. So in this episode, you're going to get some Bills specific analysis, some schematic stuff, some fit stuff, and then also a ton of prospect analysis and evaluation. And to join me on that journey in this episode, like I said, one of my favorite people, Mr. Russell Brown, formerly of Cover One, now NFL draft analyst for FantasyPros. Russ, thank you for taking the time. I appreciate you, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to talk some rugby tonight. And I want to know if you had to rank me in guests, am I one of one or am I like one of? I got to be one. I have to be.
I'd have to quantify how many people are in like my favorite guests. It would be it's a short list of like who no, I'm not saying like where you rank. I'm saying like the people that I would use the term like one of my favorite guests. It's a small list. Like I don't say that for like every person that comes on the show.
Man, that sucks for those people.
Well, it's usually more like you have to be like a repeat customer here on the show at least probably like 3 times in order to like fall. Because like once is a whatever, 2 is a trend, 3 is a blah blah blah. I feel like I got to get to at least 3, and then we're talking like good analysis, good rapport, good availability. Like there's a lot of things that go into it. There's a science to it,
That's
and
true.
it's also stressful for me like bringing guests, which is usually why I go to certain people more often than not, because 1, I gravitate towards a certain level of analysis, but 2, and you know this, like it's hard in this space to continuously have like open lines of communication with people. Some people are doing this full time and it's one of like several things that they do full time. So it's hard to get them at the right time, at the right moment, depending on when you go live. Some people live in different time zones. Some people do this as a side project. So you got to see what they're doing during the day. Do they have kids? Are they sick? Like whatever. Right. There's a lot of moving parts, which is why I always appreciate you. You know, it's very easy just to be able to text you and be like, hey man, do you want to join me like on this date? And you're like either yep, or you're like, nope. And I'm like, cool, we keep it pushing. But you are.
And that's the key right there. That's the key of me being number one. He said the keyword text. He texts me. He doesn't text all of his guests. And there's a lot of text between me and Marty Jannetty here. So I'm happy to be back.
See, now that's what I was gonna say, because you're also mean to me, which is what I was saying. Like, I don't know if I can have the number one guy. You're mean to me. You're emotionally you emotionally batter me behind the scenes, and it's really hard to deal with sometimes.
I mean, you have said some mean things to me though.
That is absolutely true, but it mainly in retaliation.
And my son just sent me a text, so I got to give him one real quick. What's up, brother?
I like it. The bomb on Dons.
Yeah.
The bomb on Dons.
He's probably dying laughing. But let's talk some football. Sorry, everybody.
No, you're good. You're good. I enjoy these one-offs and these tangents as we are, ones to do
It's good
as we get into
rapport.
it. It is good rapport. That's because we're, the tag team champs. We're the Steiner brothers, live and
That's right.
in the flesh. I was just watching a Steiner brothers match. I can't. I can't go down this road. We're gonna get too distracted. I can't. Let me stop. Let me derail this off cycle train before we get too off cycle. Let's focus on the draft. How you feel? We're about a month away, kind of like from a date perspective.
Yeah.
Close, which it's man. I feel like we were just in Mobile, and I feel like the Bills just lost to Kansas City again. Like it's crazy how
Dude.
fast the offseason like it just moves. And here we are sitting a month away from the draft after I feel like the season I really feel like we were literally just in Mobile talking ball, talking about that Lions game against like the 49ers, like
I
having
still
drinks
haven't
and
watched
food.
it.
Dude, I can't. I haven't gone back and watched any of like the Bills like losses. Like I can't do that. Like it would destroy me more than it already does. But as we sit here a month away, kind of just high level before we get into the meat of it all, what are you feeling as we get towards this draft? Are you thinking of any player in particular? Are you thinking of a position group? Is there a certain team you got your eye on, or a certain round or day? What's like as you think of like the 2024 NFL draft right now? What's like the first thing that kind of pops into your mind?
Offensive line, baby. The run is going to happen in the first round, and I think a lot of people forget that. And I said that with Michael Lombardi on VSiN weeks ago, and I've said it on this show. I think we even went into some detail about the offensive line group, and I was on the show a month ago, so I can't remember I remember we did edge, receiver. We might have even done corner, and that
We
might have
did
been it.
safety. We did safety. All
Safety.
going, yeah, all go. Man, even that too. Like it was like a month ago, or a month ago, obviously a month ago. But we were, breaking down like what to watch for heading into the combine, and now
Yeah,
combine's done and dusted, and we're getting ready to cruise into the
we're through
draft,
free agency already. Like
bro.
we're 29 days away, but no, I think I feel most confident about the offensive line. I always trust my analysis there. Sure, there's a miss or two, but I always trust how I feel on those guys, and I feel like I've got a pretty good grasp there, and I've got a good grasp on all 11 positions essentially. But
Mhm.
it's one of those things where, yeah, a month ago I was like, oh man, I'm struggling here because I felt so far behind, and now I feel like I'm caught up, and I'm like, okay, now I got to watch some more players. I got to get to the 125 mark, the 150 mark. So
Yeah,
we're in the low 100s, like 108 or 109. But I feel good. I'm feeling pretty good about it. So no, I'm excited. I'm excited to do this. I love doing this with you, and yeah, I love the questions that we have outlined or that you
yes.
have outlined for us. I'm excited.
I'm very excited too. And it's funny too, you mentioned like the board. Like I've pushed it every year. Like when I first started doing this, I was like, okay, let me have a top 100. Then I was like top 125, top 150. And then this year I was like, I'm just gonna go right and have like a top 200. And I've been you and I were texting about it like last week, and watchers of the show know Tuesday night I was like not feeling great, but I was fine. I was sick Monday. I've been sick for like 3 weeks. It's been the wildest thing, but I was good. And then Tuesday night, I got crazy sick. Like Tuesday night, like / Wednesday morning at like 2:45 a.m. Specifically 2:47 because I woke up and felt terrible. And I remember what time it was. And I was out of commission all Wednesday, all Thursday, the majority of Friday, some even into the weekend. And I was like so stressed. I was like, oh my God, I got to get to my 200. And I'm like not where I want to be. Like there's so many more tiers and levels I want to get to. I
Yeah,
was so like, and as I was like, I felt so terrible. I was asleep for like 20 of 24 hours, like those 3 or 4 days
man.
in a row. But when I was awake, I was like, I gotta get through this draft board. And it was just, man, it's funny, like those little things, like of how they stress you out. Like as you get forward, it's like, oh, I'm so excited. And then it's like, do I have enough people like scouted? Do I have everything ranked appropriately? Like I always get real anal and like tinker where I'm like, I have this guy is 93 and this guy is 94, but I feel like I should swap them. And it's like, it doesn't matter. Like you're
Yeah.
fine. Like stop with the nitpicking.
Do you have a goal of players that you try to reach every year? I don't think I've ever asked you that question.
Like in terms of like an overall number?
Yeah.
Yeah, usually I've kind of like hard set it, even though it is somewhat arbitrary. Last year I had a top 150. This year I do want to get to like a top 200, and I do think I'm still gonna reach it. I just have to kick some stuff into overtime after missing out on like, and especially because I have everything very regimented of like what positions. And you and I were going back and forth and texting. You'd be like, "Hey man, like what do you like?" 3-4 weeks ago, you were like, "Hey, what do you think of the tackles?" I was like, "I haven't gotten there yet." And you were like,
Yeah.
"Watch them now." I was like, "I have a process. Like, leave me alone. I
I
got it."
know,
But now my
dude.
process got like derailed because I missed out on like 4 days, and yeah, just but it's all good and it's fun and I enjoy it and you enjoy it. and the people enjoy it. And that's why we're here. So without further ado, let's just jump into it. Oh, also, and I want to say, as Russ and I start to go through, you folks watching live and in the live chat, you know how we like to do here on this show. So for those playing at home, questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, feel free to throw them up into the chat. Anything with the super chat gets automatic priority, and I will bring it up to the screen. 1, because I respect the monetary donation. 2, I see the color and it attracts my eyes and brings me away from my notes. But also, Russ and I have specific questions we're going through tonight. So when we bring up those questions, when I bring up those headlines, again, those of you playing at home, feel free to flood the chat with your answers, your questions, your thoughts, likes, dislikes, anything and everything you got. I will bring up as many things as physically and humanly possible as we go out on this journey. But Russ, let's start with the big ticket item, round 1, the sexy aspect for most teams, including the Buffalo Bills. A lot of debate amongst Bills Mafia and Bills fans over what they want to see at 28, who they want to see chosen at 28. But I think before we get to that, and I don't mean just necessarily you and I tonight, I just mean like anybody breaking down that conversation, I think we need to first map out the first 27 picks from that aspect and really determining like who will even be there at 28, which is so much of the conversation, right? Like there's so many guys who I love, and then it's like, well, that guy's not going to be there at 28, so it doesn't even matter. Like, why do we have to have him even in that conversation? So let's start with offensive line. Guard, tackle, center, all in one grouping. I want to start with this one because I think this is probably the biggest bucket of what we're going to see in the first 27 picks. How many offensive linemen do you think go in the first 27 picks?
I think 8 go. I'm going to be honest.
Okay.
I think 8 offensive linemen. 2 of them are for sure interior guys, Jackson Powers Johnson.
I was going to say, can I guess the 8?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so
you already have 1. I gave you the easy one.
Yes. So, okay, so Alt, Fuaga,
Yep.
Olu,
Yep.
Latham,
Yep.
Mims,
Yep.
JPJ,
Yep.
Graham Barton,
Yep.
Troy Fautanu.
Yep.
Nah, sweet. I have the same. I have 8 as well. Those are literally my 8. So as soon as you said 8, I was like, I just wanted to see if it matched. Continue. Sorry, I got excited.
No, and I think that's kind of where the consensus is here. And I think, is there a wrench thrown in there? Possibly. Is it Tyler Guyton maybe out of Oklahoma? Is it Kingsley Sumaitea out of BYU, who I think as teams maybe start to do some cross checks there, you go back to the Senior Bowl, you see some of the stuff that he did and you really zero in on him. I think you can see a lot of positives within his game. And I think there's that guard tackle flexibility. You add in the fact that he's cousins with Penei Sewell. I think there's some intrigue there. So he could be a back end first round guy. He could be an option, I guess, at 28 if we want to get into that conversation. I don't necessarily see that being a thing, but maybe it is. But yeah, I think there's going to be a run on offensive linemen. And I think the Bills are going to be a team that, me personally, I think that's what they're going to zero in on in the first round, because that run is going to force teams in the second round to take the next group or the next tier or the next pairing of offensive linemen. And by the time they get into the 60s, they're already on to the next tier. So they're going to have to force their hand a little bit, I think, into that second tier of guys. If you, let's say those 8 guys we talk about as the first tier, because you can mix and match them however you want, you then get into the next tier. And that's the tier of, Zach Frazier, Tyler Guyton, Kingsley Sumaitea, Christian Haynes, the list goes on. Yeah. So I think once you get into that list, that's kind of like your second-ish, third-ish tier, however you want to word that. But yeah, I think that's what it ultimately boils down to for the Bills is, are they going to feel like they can get one of those guys in the 60s? I don't see it happening, but I could be wrong. I mean, I've been wrong before, but I think the last 3 years I've nailed the Bills picks. So I think I don't know. We still got a couple weeks, so we'll see. I'm still trying to figure it all out, but yeah, I think 8 offensive linemen go.
And I'm in a similar boat. Like, I think Guyton is the one that I think is a real wild card too. Like, could potentially creep up in there, and then that makes 9. Either way, I think that's a good option for the Bills, even if it's 8, just to play like kind of lowest number scenario. That's 8 of the 27 picks ahead of you going on offensive linemen. So you're down to like 19. And that's a really like fun option when you look at that potential run. Looking at it from a Bills perspective, I don't know why I've just kind of gotten this feeling because offensive line isn't like a need for them, but if someone falls, I could see it. And I put Jackson Powers Johnson on the graphic just for the sheer idea of it. Like, I think he's going to go somewhere in the 20s. And I don't know why I just have this feeling of like him being there at 28 and the Bills just being like, well, this dude's awesome and we could kind of like use him. So boom, like let's take him. And then you move McGovern back to guard and then you have JPJ at center. And he's absolutely phenomenal. Although I do like Zach Frazier, who I watched a bunch today. But JPJ is just in another world of his own. And I remember you and I talking about him at the Senior Bowl. Like I wasn't prepared for him to weigh in the 330s, given how he moves on tape, like how athletic he is, how fluid he is in space. I knew he was big, but I was like, he'll probably push like 318, 319, maybe low 320s. And he was like 334, 333, like good into the 330s. Not like, he's, 330.8. No, he's like mid 330s. And then you're also sitting there being like, okay, like that's not just workout weight. He's going to practice this week at that weight, which he did. And he looked so good. Yes, he dominated. He looked so good. Yeah. And he ticks like every box. And I think that's just such great value at the back end. Even if a team doesn't need offensive line, I will never be upset at a team drafting an offensive lineman because you always need offensive linemen. Like, I don't care. Offensive line and corner for me is always those spots where like you can never have enough offensive linemen and you can never have enough corners. And especially too with that conversation, I know for people of, help Josh Allen. And I know a lot of that has been like from a weapons standpoint, helping him with the offensive line is still a tremendous idea too. And I could see if one of these, especially from a versatility standpoint, if JPJ is there or our boy Graham Barton, if he's potentially there, like the idea, especially with Barton, who offers you like every position flex potentially with what he did at Duke. Like you could do guard, center, and tackle. Like that's a really fun option.
Yeah, tackle over. Yeah,
it's so interesting to see if they do go O-line there. But for the wide receiver only people in the first round or potentially other positions, I do think that's the biggest bucket of players that get dropped into that first round. Like I'm in the same spot. Like we said, I think the floor realistically, like I think 8 is a very safe bet with potentially. Again, I think if you could get to like 9 with Guyton, or I know, dude from BYU is really, I'm just refused to say his last name because I mispronounce it like all the time.
Mateo?
Sure. Yeah. Whatever you say. And he's rising up boards too. It's funny too. Like I felt that way about Fatanu from Washington. And then I just nailed his name. And for whatever it is, I just can't get Suamataya's name right. Oh, I guess I came close there.
You can kind of do it.
I just can't get it. Like I don't know if it's all the vowels. It's driving me absolutely nuts. But he's starting to rise up a little bit. Like people are starting to throw him into first round conversation. Like I think once the entire first round is done, I think you could see 9 or 10 offensive linemen truly being off the board. But in that first 27, I think 8 is the floor.
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100%. And I think that's why the Buffalo Bills will be faced. And just to anybody out here watching and to you, if I say the Detroit Lions and we're talking about the Bills, it's my apologies. I do Lions stuff. And they like a couple times already, I've caught myself in my head. Don't say Lions. Don't say Lions. So if I say it, my apologies. But like with me, I'm so intrigued with the offensive line pick for the Bills because, like, take Zach Frazier, for example. If you got rid of JPJ in this draft, Zach Frazier would be talked about in the first round. It would be same type of thing as we saw with Frank Ragnow when he was coming out. And not saying he's the same player because he's not, but he gives you that guard center versatility. He's got long enough arms to play either one. He's got good snap to step quickness. He is a mauler in the run game. I mean,
former wrestler, which we know Sean McDermott, and a really good wrestler, like
159 and
champion. 2.
Yeah, 159 and 2. Like, and I look at it like this: like if he's there at 28, which I think he will be, and I part of me really feels like he's the guy. Like
I was thinking that today a whole bunch, especially watching his hand usage is an Aaron Kromer-esque style.
Yes.
I was watching him against Houston. I think it's literally the second play of the game. He's blocking their really big one tech, number 93 for Houston, who's a monster. And the way he puts his inside hand in and clamps him right in his ribs, the positioning, the hand quickness, and you can see the grip strength just from there. And his hand, he's constantly refitting hands and just leveraging so well. And you combine that with the wrestling background and what he does. And I was doing the same thing. I was sitting there watching. I was like, I don't know. I just had like a gut feeling. I was like, is Zach Frazier going to be the pick at 28? I feel like people would be upset at that because not enough of the fan base knows who he is. They know of JPJ because of the rep, but I could see Frazier being the pick, and I'd be like, that's a cool pick. And I could see the fans wanting to burn everything to the ground.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the position, I mean, when you look at teams across the league, finding a center is difficult to do, but pairing one with a quarterback, young or not, or a veteran like Josh Allen, getting somebody in there, though, to help establish that ground game, which should be very important for this team for how much they use Josh Allen, and then obviously trying to get James Cook the football and running with him and doing that type of stuff. Getting that guy that could come out and help identify pre-snap, is a good leader, which is everything that he is. Like pre-snap stuff, there are glimpses on tape where, and I believe they were playing Texas, there's a glimpse where he is picking up a line stunt and a blitz at the same time. And like he identifies it, he picks it up, he's quick enough to do it. And it's like, wait a minute, this is a guy.
His head is always on a swivel. Like you're watching, like he's handling somebody here and scanning here. And then what I love too, in typical fashion, like if nobody comes, he's like, all right, cool. I'm just going to finish finding work here and bury the dude who I've just had my hand on. He's always alert, head on a swivel everywhere.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, it's like you're in my mock draft 3.0 or something. Like it's just, I don't know. I circle in on him and I always kind of create a mini board, if you will, for players that I think fit certain teams. And you obviously get kind of caught up in the consensus of what like makes sense, but then you got to create 2 or 3 players that could be sleepers or just fits because of the number of times that they visited with that player, the interest in that player, or schematically how they fit off of need or value or whatever it's going to be. And I think center is a sneaky need for the Bills. I don't think it gets talked about enough because everybody wants Worthy or Mitchell from Texas. And look, I love Mitchell. You love Worthy. We like both players, but there's a reason to why when you look into big boards, the 3 receivers are in the top 5, in the top 10, and then there's a significant drop off. So it's the same question that you could have to the New England Patriots or the New York Giants or the Minnesota Vikings, whoever's going up for a quarterback. Let's take the Patriots, for example, within the Bills division. If their 2 guys are Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams, and both those guys are gone, this is a team that's projected to win 4.5 games next year. Do you really think they're going to force their hand at the quarterback position, knowing the hit and miss, percentage of that position? Probably not. So why should the Bills force their hand at receiver just because it's a sexy new toy? It doesn't make sense because you're not necessarily going to hit at that position. Because if you go back and look at previous drafts over the years, there's a lot of guys out there on Twitter and in the national media, and myself included, that like the whole hell of a lot of receivers, and a whole hell of a lot of those receivers are on their 3rd, 4th team in the NFL right now. And it wasn't that long ago. So it's like, me personally, the safe pick is the offensive line. I think the Bills need to draft safe in round 1. They have a ton of capital for day 2 and day 3. They can get sexy then, hit the home run, and maybe it's a double, maybe it's a single. Take a guy like Zach Frazier, and I think that's what he is. I really think he would be the guy that is a no-brainer for them.
Yeah, I was literally, like I said, I was watching him today, and I don't know what it was, and really, I wish I could quantify it, but I was just sitting here watching him, and I was like, I just feel it at like pick 28. Like, I think he would be there. And it does make sense to that degree, especially given, again, and we'll have this conversation as we go forward, but given what you could still get at wide receiver in round 2, again, it might not be the specific player that you like. If you love, AD Mitchell, you don't take him at 28. You're not getting him at pick 60 if you're the Bills. Right. But that doesn't mean you can't get, you still can't get a really good wide receiver at 60, which is the whole point of how deep this class is and what you can get. You can still get a wide receiver 2 and even potentially one that still has wide receiver 1 upside based on who falls and what happens. Yeah, I'm very interested in the O-line piece.
And the other thing with the receivers too, and maybe we shift focus to receivers, but with that, I mean, I don't know. I'm just spitballing, but with the receivers, like you have Stephon Diggs. Whatever happens with his situation, we'll see. If there is even a situation, I don't know what to make of that. I'm just on the outside
he
looking
can't
in.
Go from a financial perspective. The
can't go.
No, like he would have to be an absolute toxic nightmare for them to move him because of how bad the financials are. So to put it in perspective, like if they do move him, that is literally them saying, even if it's not explicitly them saying, that's them saying this dude is such a problem. We're willing to chop off both of our arms financially just to get him out the door.
Right.
I don't think it's at that point. I don't think it's going to get to that point. But yeah, there's such a problem from a dead cap perspective. Yeah, he also from a dead cap perspective, not to get off too off track. I was looking at Dak Prescott's contract today because of the news. He's got a dead cap hit this year of $66 million, and his cap hit is 55. Like, it's wild what his cap number is. And Diggs isn't to that level, but it's wild as well.
Yeah, and I think that's how, like, people say the salary cap doesn't exist. You're probably right. It doesn't to an extent because these teams are worth billions and billions of dollars. But at the same time, the structures of these deals is why there's so much cap flexibility, because however they structure it, and I don't know all the financials and all the technical terms. We need Greg Thompson for that. But it's one of those things where, like, you're paying them $55 million on the year, but then there's another $60 million behind it because if you get rid, like, there's just so much financial guru crap behind it. I don't know. But talking about receivers, Diggs, Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, Mac Hollins. Not saying Mac Hollins is it's going to move the needle tremendously that you don't take that guy at 28, but I'm operating under the assumption that yes, Mitchell, Thomas, those guys are gone. So you get rid of the top 5 guys with Mitchell, Thomas, and then obviously the consensus top 3. Now you're forcing your hand at what? Keon Coleman doesn't create a bunch of separation. That was what I think that was the problem with Gabe Davis, right? I don't know. Like, yeah. So, I mean, it's like one of those things, like you have Dalton Kincaid, like you've spent the capital on the weapons. You now have to spend the capital on the product or on the protection and getting things going. And they haven't really done that. Like, they've brought in guys like, who we're talking about here with the center McDermott and or McGovern, excuse me. And it's one of those things where, like, you brought in that guy for essentially pennies on the dollar, but you let go of Mitch Morse because he can't stay healthy. Like, you got to bite the bullet here, and you got to get a quality center on the interior. And when you fit the profile that the Bills look for in football players, it's just a no-brainer to me. So
that's fair. Let's I was going to go QBs next, but let's stick to the wide receiver group since we've already talked about it a little bit. So first 27 picks, you kind of alluded to it already. The big 3, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze. You also think Brian Thomas Jr. and A.D. Mitchell both go in the top 27. Is that the only? So you think 5 wide receivers go in the top 27, and that's who those 5 are?
Yep. And I think ultimately 6 go in the first round. I mean, you can make a case that Xavier Worthy doesn't go in the first round just simply because of his frame, and teams might be hesitant on that. He had the lower body injury stuff earlier in the year too. There might be some hesitation there, but when you look at like Marquise Hollywood Brown and players with that profile, there's a lot of intrigue. And when you run a 4-2-1 or a 4-2-2 or whatever you want to say, there's a team out there that's going to fall in love with that speed. I don't know if it's Miami. I don't know if it's Philly. I don't know if it's Tampa.
Man, if it was Miami, how ridiculous. Him, Waddle, and Hill, and A-Chain. Like, that's wild.
I know. I look at Tampa, and I'm just like, man, you brought in Baker. You brought back Mike Evans. Do you try to take this offense to the top, but you have the need at corner because Carlton Davis is now gone? So, like, Tampa's an intriguing team right before the Bills. Arizona's another one. I mean, do they... Call me crazy, but do they double down at wide receiver in the first round? Do they take Marvin at 4 and then they take Xavier Worthy at 27? Like,
man,
It sounds crazy. They have enough capital. Do they move up for a guy like that? So, like, I think realistically, there's 5. I think Coleman and Worthy are the 2 guys that are a bit on the outside. I don't think Leggett gets in. I just don't. I mean, maybe, but I would be surprised. Like 7, 8 receivers in the first round. I know it's a pass heavy league. I know they're fun and sexy picks, but I alluded to it. There's not been a lot of success once you get past the first kind of 2 tiers of wide receivers in the NFL draft. Every tier you find one guy, but a lot of teams are swinging and missing. Are they really going to swing and miss on guys that, a month ago we had Xavier Leggett as like 50th, 55th overall, but now suddenly I got to put him at 30th in my mock draft? No, I don't think so. Like, I don't care what the consensus says, So, yeah, I think realistically you got 5. I really do. So,
and I also wonder too, the positional depth at wide receiver. I just wonder how much that's going to come into play for teams. Brandon Beane talked about it a little today on, I think it was on the PFF podcast or something like that, talking about, I think his literal example was if you had a player on equal tier for wide receiver and some other position, they're more likely to go with that other position because it probably has more of a drop off to the next pick than wide receiver does. But if the wide receiver value is up here and the other one is here, then they're like, no question, we're going to go with wide receiver. And that's been my thing all along. Like the drop off from whatever wide receiver I think you probably get at 28 to whatever wide receiver you could get at 60, I don't think is as significant as defensive tackle or edge potentially, or interior offensive line or tackle, like whatever like aspect. I just want to shout this out real quick. Roy says Troy Franklin late round 1 wouldn't shock me. Troy Franklin is a false god and a false prophet. I hope that doesn't happen, but to each their own. But I respect you, Roy. I actually could see that potentially happening as well. So like I'd be cool if the Bills go receiver, like if the Bills go with Leggett, I have no problem because, okay, you want to take a baby AJ Brown, dude who's 220 plus and runs a 4.3 and high points the football and knows how to play above the rim downfield. Cool. I also like the fit of Leggett with the Bills because, and you were talking about, yes, and you were talking about that position grouping, like the receivers. The big thing with me is whoever they draft as wide receiver 2, right? Like that rookie wide receiver this year isn't going to be target 2 in this offense. That's Dalton Kincaid. And then target 3, Khalil Shakir, potentially James Cook. If you're talking touches, catches plus runs, James Cook is option 3 in this offense. Yeah. So let's label players as options. Diggs is option 1. Kincaid is option 2. Cook might even be option 2 if you're factoring in the run game. But your top 3 from a touches and options perspective is already set. So that rookie this year at best, or at like most in terms of responsibility, really only has to be option 4 or target 4 or touch 4 guy for you. But again, that's not even including Shakir and Dawson Knox and anybody else that could creep up the pipe, which is why I like the idea of a Leggett because, okay, they don't have somebody with his size profile, his athleticism profile, and his speed profile. What does he need to do? Needs to add some polish to his game from a route tree perspective and a stem perspective. Cool. You know what's a really great way to do that? While you're option 4 or 5 as a rookie, and you can all you would have to do is just be big and strong and fast your rookie year and let the rest of the game come to you. And I completely forgot about Curtis Samuel in that whole conversation with that just now. So he's going to be in your top 4 as well. So that rookie, wide receiver, that wide receiver 2, even if it is Leggett or Javon Baker, whoever it is, really is option or touch 5 in your offense. So I like the idea. I've come around more to the idea of Leggett. I always liked this tape from a wow perspective heading into the Senior Bowl. I didn't love him on day 1 at the Senior Bowl. I liked him more on day 2, but I just think you could take a guy who has that ceiling and just needs to work on his floor because you can give him a lot of that time his rookie year to work on that floor because he might be wide receiver 2 on the depth chart, but he's not wide receiver 2 from a touches or targets perspective, which allows him to really develop. And then you can just lean into that skill set, which is why I have a 2 on Leggett. I would have no problem with him being the pick at 28 because I think the fit with the Bills really works for them, but also for his career trajectory because there's not going to be a lot that's put on his plate from an expectation perspective, given the surrounding cast.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think like Look, I like the fit of Leggett, but the point to receiver 4, receiver 5, the number of touches, like that's why I think like, do you really need to force that in the first round? I just
And that's why my ideal option is I would love to take best player available at any
yeah,
spot in round 1, and then just like if you could do that and guarantee me the Bills get Javon Baker at 60, like I've felt this way since before the Senior Bowl. That's why I would take that every day of the week, because
yeah,
he can also be a true X, and I think he has some wide receiver 1 upside as well. But then you get that fit with the upside, let him
yeah,
simmer, and you've had that BPA. Obviously, that's, you're taking some risk into that there. But yeah, it's just from that need perspective. Long term, it's a little different with, okay, what is the long term structure for Shakir or Samuel or Diggs or whatever? Like, when do you need a new wide receiver 1? Is
right,
it next year? Is it 2026?
right.
Like, Diggs might still very well be on the team. Does he start to get phased out? Like, does he slow down? I'm not saying he will, but just all these conversation pieces, I think that's what starts to creep into people's minds. But that's why I think it gives them so many options at wide receiver, because you really just need a specific dynamic or skill set added to the group right now. And that gives you the entire menu. Like, you can go
Yeah,
anywhere because they don't need to be the second option for your team.
right. No, and that's a good point. That's a good point. I guess really, I mean, like, what would we identify the Bills' biggest needs are going like 30 days away, 29 days away, whatever the countdown is. But what are the biggest needs for the team? I mean, how would we assess the team right now? I would say interior offensive line, at least one,
Hmm.
another receiver, sure.
Hmm.
Uh, just as like that wide receiver 4 or 5.
Hmm.
And maybe there's the upside to be like number 2 or number 3 in the
Hmm.
offense. Then you have corner safety, some type of
Yes.
defensive back, probably multiple.
Yes.
Um, another interior defensive lineman, I would have to
Yep.
think.
Yep.
And I mean,
Edge.
that's how I would identify it. I would maybe even throw a linebacker in there, but I know you don't want to talk about Edgerrin Cooper, so we
I
won't.
like Edgerrin Cooper. I just don't want to have to take him in the first 2 rounds. Like, that's just given what else they have, because
Yeah.
you need a wide receiver 2 from
Mhm.
and I want to say wide receiver 2 again. I mean, on the depth chart, I mean from like a size and frame perspective. Like, that's what you need. So you need wide receiver. You need another interior defensive lineman. You need another edge. I would love some offensive line depth, but you could also go offensive line starter on the interior. I also think you could throw a dart on the board for a tackle just to have some added depth and long term. Like, I know in tons of mocks aren't real, but like the PFF one I do, Christian Jones is always available in like the 130. So I'm always like, okay, cool. I'll take Christian Jones every single
Yeah.
time. Why not? Tackle from Texas, for those who don't know. Again, so you're looking at edge. You could still make a pick at safety. Mike Edwards is only there on a 1-year deal, and the depth behind him is still shaky. Corner is another one, too, that you and I were talking about the other day. Rasul Douglas, he didn't have an extension this offseason. He did a restructure. So he's under contract through this season and is a UFA after next year. So that means your CB1 for this year is not on the roster for 2025. Yeah, for 2025. Kaiir Elam is still an unknown quantity.
Mhm.
And even if you're super high on Kaiir Elam, okay, he's CB3 this year, you still need a corner 4. But realistically with Kaiir, and I want him to be CB like 2 or 1 in an ideal world, but there's just so much unknown. I think corner's a need, because you could need a CB3 this year, and corners get banged up all the time, especially Benford and even Douglas to a degree. So you need a CB3 this year, in my estimation, but also you could use that CB3 to be your CB2 next year. Maybe it's, and I give the example all the time, like I always find a way to get like Chris Abrams drain, like in like the 3rd or like 4th. And I'm like, okay, cool. Be my
Right.
CB3 this year. And then it's you and Christian Benford next year as the 1 and 2. Or
Right.
maybe, and this was one that was proposed in the chat. I forget by who, like a month ago. Someone was throwing out scenarios and was like, oh, like where does like best player available come down versus need? This was before Trey White got cut and everything. And somebody was like, what happens if Terry and Arnold falls to 28? I was like, he's awesome, but like you have Trey and Douglas and Benford, you don't need it. Now I'm sitting there being like, oh, if Terry and Arnold fell,
Yeah.
that's
Oh, yeah.
actually pretty sick, because now again, like you have to figure out who's going to be CB3 this year, but you have your long-term CB1 and 2 with him and Benford. Like there's just all these Brandon Beane did a good job, like he does every offseason, of mitigating all the needs so that the conversation we're having is the one that we have, where there's not like priority one is this. No, he fills the holes and mitigates things so you can have a conversation of being like, oh, it could be this, it could be that, it could be over here, which is what makes their options and their menu so wide open, which again, coming back to receiver, is why I think receiver in round 2 just makes so much more sense, because there's so much less positional drop off there than there is at these other positions that they could use guys at. Now, the flip side of that I'm worried about, and you kind of alluded to it a bit, I do see like 5 or 6 wide receivers going in the first round. But then from like the end of the first to pick 60 where the Bills go, I could see like 12 wide receivers going, where it's just this huge run. And then it's like, we're in on the tail end of the run, and all that depth that we loved in round 2 is gone. That's where you try to balance and you get scared, because that's where I think the big run is going to happen. I don't think you're going to see all these first round wide receivers. I think that's for the offensive line and another position to a degree that we're going to get into in a minute. I think the run on wide receiver really happens from the end of the first round through the end of the second. Like, I think wide receiver dominates round 2, and then you're kind of taking, a luck of the draw, or taking kind of fate by the wayside a little bit and trying to see who's going to be there at 60.
Yeah, but then you got you'll have a run on running backs. I know that'll probably more so start in the third round, but you can see probably 1 or 2 go in the second. I would have to assume at least 2, between Trey Benson, Jonathan Brooks, Blake Corum. I mean, kind of take your pick of who, Marshawn Lloyd, Jalen Wright. I mean, there's enough there where maybe the Bills get a little lucky and kind of get somebody to fall at wide receiver to them in the second round that kind of fits that tier. And then they don't necessarily have to be this 60, 70 reception guy in year 1 because they were picked at 28. They can catch 35 balls, 400 yards, 3 or 4 touchdowns, and be fine. And I see
all the fans are going to talk and be like, he sucks. He only caught 35 balls.
Right.
They're not going to look at the usage. They're just going to be like, he sucks.
Right. He's only on the field for 500 snaps, but whatever. But no, you look at like, a lot of comments here about pass rush and stuff like that. I think it's great. I think they should go
Real
get
quick,
a pass.
Sorry to interrupt you. Like, the chat is a great example. Like, you can see all the different options for people of how they're ranking stuff. You've got wide receiver 2, defensive tackle, safety, center, defensive end. Yeah, pass rush. Matt came here and gave specifics and said 3 tech, which is why there's somebody at 28 who I really love. Potentially, we'll talk about. Roy came in and said 3 tech. Like, RC is coming in saying safety is 1, O-line is 2. But again, it's a great microcosm of what the Bills need. Like, you could ask 10 people what the biggest needs are and rank them, and all 10 will give you 10 different orders, because it's all a little bit, it's all 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
Yeah. No, and like pass rush, like once you get through Dallas Turner, Jared Verse, and Leatu Latu, there's a drop off. There just is. It's a big drop off, like a significant drop off. And you're not going to force your hand to take Braylon Trice or Adisa Isaac or Chris Braswell. I mean,
or your boy Chop Robinson, who you love.
No, you're not going to take him. Like, could you take Darius Robinson at 28 and get away with it? Yeah. Could you take Johnny Newton and get away with it? Absolutely. I think he's a great fit. I think he's a home run pick next to Ed Oliver. But last time I said that, I was an idiot, and they don't need 2 3 techs, even though you can align things differently in the NFL with 2 eyes and 4 eyes and whatnot. But whatever.
I was gonna pocket. I just want to comment on that now. Like, so initially, before the Bills had re-signed Daquan Jones, and you and I have talked about Newton and Murphy a bunch, but specifically Newton, I really like Newton. I liked him when he was Jerjon Newton. I like him still, even though he's Johnny Newton now. Either way, however you want to label yourself, I'm fine with it. I didn't like the idea of him at 28 because of the positional redundancy with Ed Oliver. I thought you weren't maximizing his skill set, because, okay, like, what's he going to do? Play like rotational 3, or like, are you going to try and put him at 1 tech? Again, that's not maximizing his skill set. With them bringing Daquan in, I don't know what that triggered or changed in me. I do to a degree. I am very much on board with Newton at pick 28 because of your top 3 on the interior, which is a premium position nowadays. If you can generate pass rush from the interior spot, like, that's why so many of these teams are paying your Chris Joneses and your Jeffrey Simmons and your Aaron Donalds, like these dudes that dominate inside who can compromise. the depth of the pocket is just so tremendous. But with Newton, even though he's your second string 3-tech, like your first and second down dudes are Daquan and Ed Oliver. And this isn't to say that Daquan can't play on third downs, because he can, and he showed it this past season. But when you get to those known passing downs and passing situations, it's Ed Oliver and Newton on the inside. Or to your point, you can play games and kick Newton out to a 4-eye or even put him on as a 5, depending on what kind of tackle situation you got. Same thing with Ed Oliver. The games you can play. But even aside from that, known passing downs and passing situations, it's Newton and Ed Oliver on the inside. And that's nothing to sneeze at with Daquan. Like, you would then have this nasty 3-man rotation on the inside with Austin Johnson, who the Bills just signed, as your defensive tackle 4. So you're looking at your 2 1-techs in Johnson and Daquan. Your 2 3s are Newton and Oliver. That's a very solid top 4 versus the run and the pass. Then you're also looking at I don't want to say very little, because I don't want to set the expectation so high for Newton or lower it for Ed Oliver. But then you're mitigating the drop off when Ed Oliver goes off on the to the sideline and you bring in Newton. Like, you're looking at the high tier guy as your defensive tackle 2 at the 3-tech spot. But again, it's that pass rush usage. And like you said, this is a passing league. So even though Newton would be a backup, I still think he's going to be a guy who's seeing like 45, almost 50% of snaps, depending on what the game script is. And then that's tremendous. Now you got a premium spot who's affecting the quarterback and who fits the Bills scheme so well from a penetration standpoint. That's really why. And so to hear Pete's comment, like, oh no, we have 2 Ed Olivers. What a terrible thing. That's been my thought. And then you're working in like Daquan Jones wherever you want. Like, just that's what's gotten me on board more and more. You want to affect the quarterback. Pass rush has been a letdown for the Bills in the playoffs these past couple of years. And I think a lot of times the thought is, oh, pass rush, defensive end, edge. For me, I'm looking there. I think the premium guy who's going to be there from a pass rush perspective at best is probably Newton. I like Darius Robinson a bunch. I would play him at edge, not at defensive tackle. I do think he fits the Bills archetype, but I don't think he's there as a pass rusher right now. I'd have no problem taking him at 28 because big, long, strong, and he's going to play the run like a monster. Like, you could do a lot worse than having Darius Robinson and Greg Rousseau as your defensive ends when you want to play light boxes because nobody's getting outside. You have forced and boxed every single run inside no matter what. And then that obviously changes the things you can do, which is so I'm okay with Robinson there. My dream has started to become like Newton at 28 because I think he's a premier player. I have a round 1 grade on him, and him being there at 28, I don't care if someone's going to be like, well, we already have 2 starters inside. Yeah, but he's a hell of a third option. And then on passing downs, he's your starter inside.
Yeah. And you can, like we mentioned, alignment versatility. Sure, you can move him in a variety of spots, which he did at Illinois with Newton. He moved all over the place. I mean, you go to the Mississippi State game in the bowl game that they had 2 years ago. He's lined up at the nose, the 3, the 2-eye, the 5, you name it. He was everywhere. And that was really when I think he started to turn it on and really show, okay, I'm going to take over this team now defensively for us. But the other thing too is like you can bring in so many different fronts now. Like you can bring in, 5-man fronts, the 4-man. You can.
And the Bills started to monkey with a little bit last year. They used some more bare fronts. They used some more tight front stuff. Like, and then you start to get really creative with those odd fronts and what you can do.
Yeah, exactly. So you get into all this different stuff, and I think getting a guy like Newton just makes a lot of sense. I mean, because the players that they've brought in on the interior or brought back on the interior, they're not necessarily sure things. Newton isn't a sure thing either. I mean, he's got to be healthy. He's got to have his head on right in the NFL. I mean, all these guys do. They got to be smart. But at the same time, like you bring him in, you kind of have a long-term plan for the next 4 or 5 years on the interior to help Ed Oliver and help your pass rush and stop Patrick Mahomes. I mean, that's the guy that you got to stop. You got to find ways to limit him, Isaiah Pacheco, and that Kansas City Chiefs offense.
An interior pass rush, if you got to choose, like you can either have pass rush from the edge or pass rush from the interior, you're taking pass rush from the interior every single time because that's literally the worst option for a quarterback is pressure right up the gut in their face. And that is what Newton gives you. Not to mention, from a long-term perspective, Daquan signs that 2-year contract, which I love. He's 32 years old. You bring Newton in, Now you're solidifying two of your top three guys with Newton and Oliver for the next 3-4 years with what Oliver's contract is. Then you just have to keep fitting in whoever that one tech is or what you want to do. Like you could do a lot worse than going with Johnny Newton at pick 28.
Yeah. I mean, and imagine a defensive line that is featuring in the AFC Championship game, 3rd and 8, game on the line, Von Miller, Greg Rousseau, Johnny Newton, and Ed Oliver. I mean, that is a recipe for success, and that's what it's about. And I was bringing, I'm glad we bring up the pass rush and Johnny Newton, because as I was kind of talking about earlier, like for each team in the draft, I bring up kind of a mini big board for that player, and I'll go – or a mini big board for that team. So like I'll have like 3 or 4 players that I really like. And when I get to the Bills, the 3 players that I consistently write down are Zach Frazier, Johnny Newton, and Xavier Worthy. I think that those are the 3 guys. If they were to somehow get one of those 3, they're better off as a football team.
And you're not writing down AD Mitchell because you think he's going to be gone.
I think he's going to be gone. And when you have, let's just say the Chargers, for example, let's say the Chargers move from 5 to 11 and they get pick 23. Well, if they pass on a receiver at 11 because the run happens, and they take Brian Thomas Jr. or AD Mitchell at 23, which is kind of weird that they would take AD Mitchell, because athletically speaking, like from a frame and measurable standpoint, he's damn near the same player as Quentin Johnston when you look at the frame. But I think he is a different type of player, to be completely honest with you, but that's a conversation for a different day. But yeah, I mean, that's just kind of how my process works with each team and how we figure out what they're going to do and who they're going to take. So the 4th player that I would add to that big board for kind of myself would be a defensive back. And I haven't figured out what defensive back makes sense for the Bills. I don't know if that's Kamari Lassiter. I don't know if that's a corner, a safety. I don't think it's like a Kool-Aid McKinstry. I don't think it's like Nate Wiggins, Quinyon Mitchell, or Terrion Arnold. I think those 3 guys are kind of gone. And then I look at, potentially the safety spot. Do they force their hand with like Tyler Nubin? Do they? I don't think Cam Kitchens is on the board at 28 anymore. I just don't. I don't think he tested well enough. Not saying the pro day wasn't good, and not saying that play speed and tape speed and all that stuff doesn't matter. It does, but the combine does matter to an extent. And he just, I don't know. There's some concerns there now, just athletically speaking. But yeah, I don't know what they do in the secondary. And that's the kind of the holdup with me with the Bills, is which one, as far as defensive backs, which ones do they take at 28 if that's the direction that they go? Because like we said, they don't really have a clear need. They have kind of a wide variety on the menu. It's like you go to your favorite dine-in spot and you're like, man, I like the chicken strip pita, but I like the pizza. I want the burger and the patty melt. I don't know what I want. And that's what the Bills have presented their fan base, because you really don't know.
I've gotten into like the 2nd and 3rd tiers of corners and become like obsessed with them to the Bills, like the Mike Sansertills. Honestly, both dudes from Missouri. I like Rakestraw, and I mentioned KAD, like him being in that mix. I want to take a look at Andrew Phillips from Kentucky. I haven't watched him enough. But even some of the dudes, like a couple of your boys who I knew, you like Brownlee from Louisville, Max Melton, your boy from Rutgers. Like there's all these intriguing ways that the Bills could go with corner. There's so many options, like from this aspect. Let's hit a couple pieces real quick. We've had so much of this conversation. Let's just hit. We could just some quick one-liners. How many QBs do you think go in the first 27? Do you think JJ McCarthy is a lock now? We get 4 QBs in the top 27?
Yeah, I think 4 are the lock.
Okay.
I struggle with saying, is there a 5th? And that's just simply because of the Denver Broncos. Like, I don't know what the hell they're doing.
Who's the 5th going to be? Penix? Or do you think like all this love for Spencer Rattler's coming through? Like I
know. I think if it's Denver, I think it's Bo Nix. I think it's Nix.
He's such a Peyton QB. Like
that's what I'm saying. Like stylistically, he fits with what he's looking for in a quarterback, experienced at 61 games played. You don't necessarily, I don't think he's going to get much better in the NFL, but maybe he gets a touch better under Sean Payton. Like if he was to go to, let's just say Tampa Bay, I think he's just a dude, right? Like he's probably like Kyle Trask 2.0. But if he goes to Denver with Sean Payton, I think it could potentially work. And I'm so intrigued there at 12. Like, what the hell do they do? Because they don't really have the ammo to trade up unless they're taking future assets or Patrick Surtain or something like that, and they're moving a player. I don't think that's going to happen. So like, I think 4 for sure, probably 5, just simply because there's so many needs for quarterbacks.
Fair. And then, all right, so we're looking at that. Defensive tackle, I think, is a quick one for us as well. Like I think the only sure defensive tackle lock in the first 27 picks is Byron Murphy from Texas.
Yep.
Agreed? Yep. Okay, cool. Same spot. Edge, Turner, Verse, Latu, those 3.
Yep.
Any chance you think Latu? I think Turner and Verse, there's no chance in hell either of them fall to 28, especially Turner. I don't think Turner is ahead of Verse for me, but Verse isn't falling as well. Any chance, whether it's the medical, whether it's some of the stuff on tape that you and I have talked about, any chance you think Latu falls to 28? He's been a hot name for Bills fans lately. And then he also ticks a box as well. Because again, you're looking at that edge spot. It's Groot, it's Vaughn, it's AJ Epinesa, it's Kingsley Jonathan right now. Vaughn is still an unknown commodity at this point. Can he be an edge 2? Can he get back to a 1? Is he a 3? I do think edge is a need. What are your thoughts on Latu potentially falling to 28? Because I do think he ends up in that mid-20s range. I don't think it's unheard of that he falls to 28. I doubt it, but I wouldn't be completely floored if he fell.
No, he's like the one guy where I'm like, okay, if he fell, I get it. A lot of medical stuff there. Teams are probably just not drafting him because of the medicals and maybe some of the concerns in the run game. Like we were talking about it on the other day. Just he's a fun player to watch. Best pass rusher in the draft by far, just as far as hand usage and the repertoire of moves that he has. He's got great length for the position. He's got good overall size. I mean, we're 6'5", 259. But
long arms,
like he's got a really nice, double swipe move. He can swim. There's so much. Like so much that is just beautiful to his game. I mean, it's chef's kiss, but the run game stuff is what worries me. Like when I'm watching his teammate, Gabriel Murphy,
your boy,
run in there with his head cut off, like his head's on fire, just going berserk in there.
Yeah, just trying to go through everyone. I love every once in a while too, like Murphy will throw a cross chop in, and if it doesn't work, the next snap he's like, I'm just running through this tackle's face. Or they're lining him up in the A gap, and he's going up against guards and centers and as a little athletic outside like edge.
Yeah, and Gabriel Murphy's a guy that I don't know what to do with him. I think he's a top 50, top 60 player in the draft as far as tape. I mean, like from an edge rusher standpoint, he's 4th best in the class as far as pass rusher. Like by far, he's in that tier of Verse, Turner, and Latu. Maybe there's a step down, but the stuff that he can do with only 30.5-inch arms is ridiculous. But that's the problem. 30.5-inch arms, only 6'2", kind of maxed out with his frame. What is an odd front stand-up outside backer? Like, what the hell is he? So that's the thing. But with Latu, like I think he's in the run game. It's the hesitation, right? Like I don't see him knifing down the line of scrimmage and laying out to make the tackle. Like he's content with just kind of setting that edge and being there. Not saying he can't set the edge.
I was thinking of this earlier because we were talking about so much yesterday. Like, and I don't mean this as a knock as a pass rusher. He's such a finesse pass rusher with his hand usage, his quickness. Everything is fine and precise. I also think he's a finesse run defender. And I think that's why you phrased it perfectly yesterday. Like he doesn't really stick his nose in a lot of stuff. And like if he's not winning immediately off the line and there to make the play, you don't really see it. And I think because he plays the run and the pass the same way, which is a finesse precision style. And it works tremendously as a pass rusher. But I think that's why it leaves you with something to be desired against the run.
Exactly.
Playing the run, it's pure mentality. It's just like violence and wanting to do it versus like, okay, my hand here and precise this and time this. It's like, nah, dude, like you want precision and technique, but it's just a mentality and you want to beat the hell out of the man in front of you and stop the ball.
Right. Yeah. And I think the thing too is like when you look at the board in front of the Bills, like I think there's just too many teams that either need help on the interior offensive line or on pass rush or whatever, like, especially with pass rushers, I think there's just too many teams in front of them. Like Arizona at 27, they could use a pass rusher. Tampa Bay, they just got rid of Shaq Barrett. They could use one. And especially with Arizona, they love to dial up different types of blitzes and packages. Like they make sense. Green Bay, with the NFC North getting potentially 2 young quarterbacks in there with Caleb Williams and maybe JJ or Drake May or whatever, like you already have Goff, you have some established guys there. you gotta get that pass rush going, especially in the playoffs. You have Gary, you have Lucas Van Ness. Now you bring in Latu. Like, you get some options there, especially with the new defensive coordinator. You look at Dallas. I mean, what does Dallas do? They just lost Torrance Armstrong. I mean, they've lost some guys. So I don't know. I just think Latu's going to be gone. I think it's a dream scenario that he's there at 28. Maybe they move up a little bit to try to get him, but I would be surprised. But yeah, like, once you get through those three, there's a drop off. I don't think Chop Robinson's a first round pick. I think Darius Robinson, you could make the case, but it feels like that's kind of cooled off a little bit. That felt like more like Senior Bowl hype. And then you watch him in that 3-3-5 stack and how horrible that is. And you're like, I don't know what to do with this guy.
His testing also didn't help him as well. Like, he felt big and clunky.
Yes.
And
yes.
I didn't expect his change of direction to be great. Again, I think he's a compression style power rusher, but the fact that you were still having, or that some of like the larger conversation is still like, oh, cool, you like Darius Robinson. Are you playing him at edge or defensive tackle? That right there is enough to be like, oh, like, to scare people off a little bit, or scare me off a little bit. But to your point, like, after that top three at edge with Turner and Verse and Latu, I think it's similar to the fall off at the top two at defensive tackle. Like, I think those three edges are in a class of their own. And I also think Dallas Turner is in a class. I like Verse, but I think Dallas Turner is just, with what kind of athlete he is, I just think he's in a almost tier of his own at that edge spot. So you've got those three at edge, and then you've got Murphy and Newton at defensive tackle. There's a bunch of like defensive tackles I like as we go down farther. I know a bunch of Bills fans like Braden Fisk. Some like Chris Jenkins. I like Dwayne Carter from Duke. I like both of the Clemson boys. I like Rook. I like Tyler Davis. Like, I like Michael Hall from Ohio State. But a lot of these guys, there's a significant drop off from Murphy and Newton to whoever else. Like, I think a lot of those other guys, whoever you have as defensive tackle 3, I think a lot of it is more siloed skill sets, specific 3 tech, specific 1 tech, or more rotational options in a good depth ways. Like, I think there's a bunch of defensive tackles in this draft that can be your defensive tackle 3 or your defensive tackle 4, like, in a good way.
Yeah.
I only think really Murphy and Newton are those dudes that are like, these guys can both be your defensive tackle 1 or your defensive tackle 2 if you have a stud. And that's also part of the reason why I'm gravitating towards that spot early on. Like, if Latu fell or if Newton falls, because I think there's such a drop off at edge from those top 3 and a defensive tackle from those top 2 versus what the rest of the class looks like.
I'm with you 100%. And I think the thing with defensive tackle, like, with that drop off, like, are you, like, let's just throw a player out there, Tavondre Sweat. Would the Bills be comfortable with taking him in that, at 60 and
I don't
be
think
like,
you can now, because you've got Daquan and Austin Johnson, like, and he's a 1 tech times a million. So then, like, what are you doing?
Unless they feel comfortable enough, like, okay, this guy can play, second and short, third and long scenarios for me because he can rush the passer. Sweat can in a sense. Like, there's some limitations. He's not going to have this amazing burst and closing ability.
He's got a nice arm over swim, though, that you're like, oh, look at him just pull that out.
And there's some decent lateral movement in that phone booth.
Especially for 360 pounds, which is legitimately what he's playing at.
Yeah, and I think if you brought him in, that would free up Ed Oliver a lot, which would essentially, I think that might work for them, but it's not going to work for every team. And again, are they really going to continue to like double down with these nose and 1 technique type players?
Exactly.
I don't think so. I think they're going to probably spread the love out a little bit. So yeah, I mean, I like this defensive tackle class. I'm really intrigued with Michael Hall. I just don't know what to do with him because of his size.
Right, I'm in the same way.
So explosive, though,
bro. He's so light, but he's so explosive. And honestly, he doesn't get pushed around a ton on the inside, even though he is lighter. But in those snaps, man, he's jumping like 2 gaps in the blink of an eye. Like, he's going from like if you're looking from the defensive perspective, he's going from like the left B gap to the right A gap in like an instant. Like, the explosion, the lateral agility, the hand usage, and the quickness, everything. It's so fun inside, but I am scared, like, going up against NFL talent, like, how regular can you win there being in that 280-pound range? Like, that's a real hard life. And, I know people throw out like, oh, like Aaron Donald, but it's such a hard bar to kind of live up to. I've gotten
Yeah.
a little more confidence with it, knowing how good Kalijah Cansey did as a rookie last year, but he was a completely different tier versus Hall. And also he's built differently from a frame perspective.
Yeah.
But I think Hall's a good example too. Like there's all these guys, like I like this defensive tackle class. I don't love it if it's like, oh, I really need like a 1 or a 2 to really anchor my line, but I love it. Like there's so much depth in rounds 2 and 3 and 4 for you to get like a rotational guy on the interior and give you like defensive tackle 3, or at worst defensive tackle, like top 4 snaps. And with how every team rotates nowadays, that's tremendously valuable.
Yeah, and I think with this rotation, I think, and the Lions are a team that does it a lot. They rotate guys in and out like crazy.
But also everyone does that to a degree now, from college through the NFL. It's a
Right.
rotation position.
Yeah, and that brings up the player that's on the, on my mind, like where do the Bills value somebody like Brandon Dorless out of Oregon? Like
Oh, good
he's
call.
he's kind of like that versatile. I don't want to say he's a chess piece because he doesn't really have like a masterful skill set or one thing that really separates him from the bunch other than the fact that he deflects a bunch of passes at the line of scrimmage. Like that's really the only skill set that he has. And he's like 2 years ago, he was super explosive. Like it's weird kind of how he dropped off a little bit, but I am curious with him. Like, would they find some value there? Because he does fall into like that Levi Ozarike, Jonathan Bowler type of player. He's not super quick. He's not, overly fluid or anything like that, but a decent first step, gets his hands up, reads the quarterback's eyes well. Can that be enough to say, hey, we could take this guy at 60 and this is a guy that we bring in and just really put him into our rotation? Because if there is that drop off at 28 or, with the first round defensive lineman, and let's say Newton and Murphy are both gone and the pass rushers are gone. All right. Maybe they take the offensive lineman, play it safe. And then in the second round, they take a Brandon Dorless. I know it's not sexy. I know that would kind of be like, man, that's Carlos Basham 2.0. But at the same time,
don't say that. How dare you say his name?
I mean, he's not the same player. They're two different
absolutely.
players, but you know what I mean? Like,
no,
kind of
it
same
would be
mindset.
it would be kind of like a win coming out of your sales a little bit, I think, especially for the fan base. But that spot is a real lot. Like you need a fourth man to round out your interior defensive line for this Buffalo Bills team. And ideally, that person is a 3 tech. Like you've got Daquan and his backup Austin Johnson, and you've even got Ilianku, as that option too, kind of like the third man in that spot. But you need a 3 tech there, and it'll be really interesting to kind of see like where they go with it. Which again is why it's not horrible if you get I don't know if you get Dwayne Carter in like the 4th round or 3rd round or whatever aspect. If he's your like your second tier, like 3 tech, and he's your backup, like cool. I think that's fine. I just think it's a premium spot now. And it's why I continue to gravitate towards Johnny Newton and the idea of him being there and like what he could potentially be. And I do like Michael Hall in that option as well. Like, but again, you're not taking him early. I don't know where he's going to go. That's also pissed me. And what keeps popping in my head is, I'm so pissed that the Bills got screwed with that comp pick. Like they should have had a 3rd round pick. Now you're going from after they pick at 60, they don't pick again until 128. And then their comp pick is pick 133. That 133 pick was supposed to be a pick in the 90s or something in round 3. That's also a huge aspect too, because now you have to like chess piece this board together, which is why I'm also a fan of trading down from pick 28 or using some of their day 3 capital to move up a little bit and trying to acquire more quality with the quantity they have. Although I do like having a ton of swings at the plate and a bunch of throws at the dartboard. But yeah, that like you're sitting there for 68 picks. Like after you pick your second guy, you are waiting 68 picks. And then again, you've got pick 128, 133, and 144, and then 160 and 163. So you've got a whole bunch in round 4 and 5 that are close together, but you're missing out on a ton of like so much of this draft is strong in rounds 2 and 3. You're missing out on a good chunk of that, which means in round 1 at 28 or round 2 at 60, there's a chance you might see a name where it's like, oof, but it's like, well, we like this guy and there's a huge drop off at the position and we had to do what we had to do now, which is why I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, if it was a Zach Frazier at 28 or some name at 60 that everybody was like, really? And it's like, well, you're waiting 68 picks. Like, that's a long friggin' time, man.
Yeah. Well, look at like the Denver Broncos. Like they have the 12th pick, then they don't pick again to like 76, 77. Like that's a 65 player drop, you know? And then you don't pick again until like 125. Now you're waiting another 40 turns for another swing. Like there's some teams out there that they don't have any capital. You look at the Bears, they don't have any. They have 4 picks in the draft this year. Like I don't understand how you bring in a rookie quarterback like Caleb Williams, who, let's be honest, he's not a sure thing. You need help around him. You have a older Keenan Allen. You have DJ Moore, who takes on a bunch of contact. Like there's so many things like that you think about. And I'm not trying to make this a Bear show, but like I just get down these thought processes in my head, and I got to get them out because it's just like there's so many things that play a piece into this. And with the Bills, they have so many, like you mentioned it, so many swings at the plate where it's a good problem to have because they can package stuff, move stuff up. They're going to find teams that are going to want to move some picks to get some extra swings. And the Bills are going to be able to land on a couple of guys. And hopefully those guys are the players that we're talking about in another year as a either great rotational depth piece or a for sure starter. And I think that's the key is finding those rotational depth piece guys that they have. So,
yeah, I think that's fair. And then so to kind of like bring this together of mapping out these first 27 picks, to kind of put some things into perspective for you folks. So we're looking at, again, we're playing like minimums, like kind of bare minimum guaranteed aspects. So there's 27 picks before the Bills pick at pick 28. 28 minus, 1 is 27 for those doing math at home. We got 8 offensive linemen going. So 27 minus 8, that's 19 players that potentially will be picked in front after those 8 offensive linemen. We've got 4 QBs going in the first 27. So that knocks it down to 15. We've got 1 defensive tackle in Byron Murphy. That knocks it down to 14. We've got those 3 edges in Turner, Verse, and Latu. That knocks it down to 11. Russ has 5 wide receivers going. That knocks it down to 6 players. And then I also think you got to throw in some guarantees. Like Brock Bowers is going to go. Quinyon Mitchell is going to go. I think Terrion Arnold is going to go. Start to think of, and I hope my math isn't wrong because I was kind of doing it on the fly there with everything, but start to put that into perspective. When you start thinking of who is available at pick 28, who you really want the Bills to get, wide receiver I think could be like a wonky one. Like I could see 4 going. I could see 5 going. I could see Xavier Worthy slipping in because of that speed. I could see someone maybe betting on Keon Coleman because of the traits, and he's the 5th wide receiver or he's the 6th wide receiver. So something could get thrown off a little bit. As we talked about as well, there are offensive linemen like Tyler Guyton who could jump up a little bit, or dude from BYU. So maybe there's 10 offensive linemen that go in the first 27. But start to use that as your frame of reference when thinking about like, man, I really want the Bills to get this guy, or I'd love for them to do this at 28 and then do this at 60. It all starts with what happens in those first 27 picks. Start to put it in the frame of, okay, what do we think are the most guaranteed known quantity players that are going, either position groups or positionally? And that'll start to frame a lot of who will be there, which is why, again, like I come back to the idea of like, oh, Johnny Newton. Like, I think it's a realistic an option that he's there at 28 based on how the first 27 picks will shake out, and then kind of go from there. So I think that was a nice way to kind of frame this conversation for a little bit as we start to jump off here. Russ, let's stick with that pick 28 before we move on to the rest of our conversation here. I kind of phrased it in this way for the Bills: the most ideal and realistic pick at 28. I always have to throw the realistic in there because I don't want someone to be like, oh, like Rome Odunze falls and he's the pick at 28. Fantastic. Who is the most ideal pick for the Bills at 28, but also within that realm of realism for you?
I think we've talked about them both. I think Zach Frazier from West Virginia is an ideal and a realistic player. I mean, we went into detail about what he brings to the table. And then with Johnny Newton, I think he's the other one out of Illinois. Now, if both of those guys are either gone or just not like players that they value, I think it turns into defensive back. I think there's potentially a defensive back that they might fall in love with. Because if those guys are gone or they don't value them, I don't know what other position they would value. Like, I get it. We want to talk about receiver, but I've mentioned Mitchell's not going to be there. I really don't think he's going to be there. I don't even know if Xavier Worthy's going to be there. And Are they really going to take the swing on him just because he's fast? Maybe. I don't know.
I also don't know like, I would have been, and you mentioned earlier, like, I really like Xavier Worthy. I like Xavier. Like, if the Bills took him, I'm not going to be upset. I mean, a super fast dude who runs good routes and has really good ball tracking downfield. Cool. I'll take it.
Yeah.
I don't love, obviously, the size of the frame, although Tank Dell and Jordan Addison and their performance last year and Josh Downs have made me feel better about the sustainability of smaller dudes. And he has to clean up his drops, but the drops deep are not really an issue. I like the idea of Worthy more before the Curtis Samuel pick. I just think you really need a specific, and at the end of the day, you just want to draft good football players, right? Like, so if the Bills took Worthy or Lad McConkey, like, I'm like, okay, cool, whatever. But I do like the idea of having more of a prototypical X type of body in that grouping. I'm big into the adage, and everybody and their mother kind of says it now, like building your wide receiver room kind of like a basketball team. So I want a point guard, and I want a two guard, and I want a small forward and a power forward and a center. Like, I don't want a whole team of two guards, just like I don't want a whole team of power forwards. And the Bills don't have that power forward. They don't have that wing guy. Like, and so I would love, that's why I like the AD Mitchell fit even more. That's why I like Javon Baker. Like, the idea of, okay, this is a frame you don't have. This is the dynamic you don't have in the room. This is a skill set option. And it still gives you some of that upside you're still looking for from a 2 and a 1 perspective. But I like the Worthy fit more before Curtis Samuel. And I also think Worthy is more of like a slot and a Z more than he is an X. I've seen him get off press and be okay being off the line of scrimmage, like with his hand technique and his speed. But I just think he's a dude, like, you don't want anybody touching him ever. And so you want him as that Z. You want him as that slot. You want to use him as that move guy. But they're starting to use Stephon Diggs a little more in that way. So then I'm like, again, it's just all this positional redundancy. But at the end of the day, it's cool to have interchangeability and that dynamic and just good football players. But that fit is what I come back to with Worthy. But it does throw things off too, again, to a degree with that pick at 28. I'm in a similar boat with like the realistic option. Like, I think ideal and realistic, Newton and Latu are my top. And then I'm going to throw AD Mitchell in there potentially as well, just from like the ideal side. I really do think Mitchell's gone. Like, going into the combine, I thought Brian Thomas would be the 4th receiver off the board and would be gone by the time the Bills went at 28. And then I didn't know who went after. Now, after seeing Mitchell in the combine as well, and then you put together with the tape and all that aspect, like, I'm in a similar spot. Like, I just don't see him being there at 28, but I think he could fit into this conversation.
No, I think he does. I mean, I'm just being real. I mean, like, I'm with you. Like, I don't think it's a realistic chance of him being there. Now, if he is, awesome. Sprint to the podium, take your guy if that's your guy. Get him before the Ravens or the Chiefs get him, or potentially the 49ers. Like, no doubt about it. But I don't know. And the third guy that I would mention is, and you mentioned him earlier, is Rakestraw. I would be very, I'd be intrigued by him. I really would. Like, I don't know if it's Kamari Lassiter. I think with Rakestraw, like, he ran a 4.51. Yeah, he battled through a groin injury through most of this past season. So I think he's actually a little bit faster than that. I mean, his 100-meter dash time in high school was 11.06 seconds. But
I watched him close down Malik Neighbors in a short amount of Neighbors makes a catch over the middle against Missouri and breaks it and is about to take it, and Rakestraw closes him down in like a 10-yard hiccup. Granted, he's starting to gear up. He's ahead of like Neighbors gearing up already, so they kind of monkeys with it, but he closes him down in a hurry. And he gives you some inside-outside versatility, which I like.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is, like, he shows that, you know, he can cover the slot and kind of handle some of those shallow crossers that you see, but then at the same time, he can play on an island and in a press man situation, and he's kind of got the hip fluidity that you're looking for to kind of transition and open up field and run with the receiver. He's got long arms. I think his arms were like 32 and a half or 32. So, like, he's a willing run defender. I think he just checks a lot of boxes for what they're looking for on the perimeter. And if they don't feel like there's a sure thing there on the perimeter outside of, you know, Douglas or something like that, and they feel like they just got to bring somebody else in, or if they feel like Elam is ready to take that next step, I don't know what they're thinking in their room. They don't, I mean, like, safety, okay, Edwards is cool, but like, I think with just Rakestraw, you're trying to alleviate some of the pressure that's going to be on those DBs. And I think bringing in a guy like Rakestraw we talked about this. You bring in a kind of a CB3 and you develop him, and eventually you now have a CB1 after you lost Trey White. I think that's a good plan of attack to have. And I think Rakestraw kind of fits that. He reminds me stylistically of like Emmanuel Mosley. So I think he's somebody that makes sense. I know it sounds rich for people, but I don't know if he's going to be there at 60. I don't think Abrams Drain is going to be there at 60. So like, I think these Missouri guys are well liked in the NFL draft circle from NFL decision makers. And there's going to be surprises in the back end. It is what it is. We have to get away from the consensus thought. And that's why I'm here. And that's why we're discussing this, because like, yeah, ideally, realistically, there's a couple of guys that make a hell of a lot of sense. Latu, the guys that we've talked about, but just thinking outside the box, I think Rakestraw and the guys that you mentioned make a ton of sense. I mean, it just really does.
And I like both of those Missouri corners. There's so many corners I like in this draft. Really, a lot of the DBs, like especially safeties too. Like I really like Newbin and Cam Kitchens and Javon Bullard, but so many like the kind of the day threer type of safeties. Well, I shouldn't even say this because some people have to say, because safety's all over the place for some people, but like the Malik Mustafas, the Jalen Simpsons, like the Kaitan Oladapos, like these really interesting dudes that I'm like, oh, this guy could be like a 4th round or a 5th round safety, and you let him sit for a year. And then like, maybe that's who your starting safety is next year after Mike Edwards leaves on a 1-year type of deal. Yeah, I think there's going to be more DB action for this team aside from safety. Like, I think everybody came into this draft being like, oh, well, the Bills need a safety. And then they signed Mike Edwards and brought back Rapp. And it's kind of like, oh, they still need some depth, but corner. And I tweeted it out yesterday. I just think it's a sneaky one. Like, you technically could use a CB3 this year, and you don't have a CB1 and 2 next year on the roster because Rasul Douglas is going to be UFA. Now, maybe they're going to bring him back, and that's the plan, so on and so forth. Maybe Elam ascends. But right now, you just don't have that known quantity wrapped up. And granted, you've said multiple times here, none of these prospects are known quantities. If the draft was an exact science, everybody would hit on everything, but that's not necessarily the case. And that's what also makes this conversation very, very fun. Another conversation, wanted to have them jumping around a little bit, good. But where are we? Boom. We've talked about it multiple times here in this episode, Russ, the round 2 wide receivers and the depth there at that spot. So, and also I want to preface this and say, not everybody who goes, and we say this every year, not everybody who gets picked in the 1st round is a 1st round graded player, especially on the back end. Usually when you get to the 20s, you're getting dudes who have a 2nd round grade that are being picked in the 1st round. Now, that doesn't mean that's bad value. That doesn't mean this player is terrible. That's just how it works. The range is, and I forget it every year, and I always tell myself to write it down. What is it? Like on an average year, there's like 16 to 20 like 1st round graded players roughly. Like in a good year, you're pushing into like the lower 20s, like 23, 24 type.
Yeah, I would say the average is probably somewhere between 16 to 20. I think, was it last year or the year before? I want to say like the consensus was like 10 to 12. Like I was
thinking one year it was like 13 dudes were like had 1st round grade.
Yeah.
A couple years ago. It might have been last. Maybe it was last year's draft, but last year's draft wasn't too like stacked overall.
Yeah, I think it was last year.
Right? Last year's, right? Everything blurs together for me. Like I'm horrible with same thing with like WrestleMania. Someone will be like, oh, what number WrestleMania is your favorite? I'm like, the one had this match and this match and this match. They're like, oh, what number WrestleMania is that? I'm like, I have no idea. Like I remember certain like, I know WrestleMania 9 and like WrestleMania like 12 and 13, 14, 17, but everything aside from that, I got like, and those are landmark just for like big matches that are tied to them.
Yeah.
But I just can't, it's so hard for me to do the number stuff. But all right, so round 2 graded wide receivers. You and I both talked about a run happening on wide receivers in the 2nd round and the strength of this wide receiver class really being in round 2 graded wide receivers. So the question for you, how many 2nd round graded wide receivers do you have? So how many receivers have a round 2 grade for you in this draft class?
Looking at the board, so the round 1 guys, it stops at Rome Odunze.
So this was also my I figured we'd get to it as well. I only have 3 receivers with a round 1 grade. So it's the big 3 for you as well. So Marvin Harrison, Neighbors, and Odunze are the only receivers that have a round 1 grade.
Yep. And then we have Mitchell Coleman, Brian Thomas Jr., Xavier Worthy, Ladd McConkey, that's 5.
Yep.
Troy Franklin is 6.
Yep.
Ricky Pearsall is 7.
Yep.
Roman Wilson's 8.
Okay.
Xavier Legette is 9. Jalen Polk is 10, and that's it.
Okay, so we're pretty much very similar. I've got Legette in there as well. I've got Javon Baker in there, who has a 2 for me, like a 2-3. This is one I keep flirting on going back and forth. I really like Jermaine Burton. And I
Yes.
like him so much that I've had like a 3 on him, but I keep flirting with the idea. So for this, I'm like, just screw it. I like him so like I'm just giving him a 2 as well. So I'm in a similar boat. So that gives me like 11 or 12. But
I
either
might have
way,
missed his name. He might have been on there. I'm trying to see.
I've got Worthy, Brian Thomas Jr., and this isn't in order, just off the rattling through. I've got Worthy, Brian Thomas Jr., A.D. Mitchell, Lad McConkey, Keon Coleman, Troy Franklin, Ricky Pearsall, Xavier Legette, Jermaine Burton, Javon Baker, Roman Wilson, and Jalen Polk. So I am sitting there at 12. And honestly, I really, really like Jalen McMillan. And if you twisted my arm, I might give him a 2. And so then I'm pushing it to 13. Yeah. But no matter how you slice it, there's a lot of round 2 graded wide receivers. Is this also that specific area, the round 2 graded wide receivers? Is that the strongest spot and position in this entire class? Like not even just the wide receiver class as a whole, top to bottom, but that round 2 wide receiver grouping. Is that the strongest aspect of this draft class as a whole? Right? It's a good question, right?
It's a great question. I don't think so, just simply because of the offensive tackles. Like we can talk about probably 10 to 11, maybe 12 guys in the first round. And then once you get through those guys, you can like, and that's in like the 10 first round offensive linemen, we had the 8 going before, the Bills at 28. And then you could add in Zach Frazier in there as 9, Christian Haynes is 10, Tyler Guyton as 11. Okay, so let's say those are the 11 potential first round guys or in that conversation. But then you get into Kingsley Sumaiteya, you have Jordan Morgan, you have Roger Rosengarten.
Forgot about Jordan Morgan, who I really like as well. You and I were talking about him. Yeah, good call. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you have him. You have Delmar Glaze. You have Cooper Beebe, Dominic Puny, Cedric Van Pan Granger.
Puny is one who I like too. I was watching Illinois versus Kansas and watching Puny kind of give it to Newton a little bit. And I was like, ooh, and just big body dude, like long arms, big frame. Okay, like I like it.
Yep. No, so I think I really think it's kind of like a toss up between those two. And it's more so like, who's going to be the more successful? Like it's almost like, remember like those Survivor Series matches, like where you'd have 4-on-4 all the time.
Yes.
And
it's like how it used to be when we were a proper country. And
right. Exactly.
Oh man, dude. And you remember too, Survivor Series used to always be the Wednesday. It was the night before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
It was
awesome.
Yes, it was the best thing because you knew you were off the next day. It was a pay-per-view the night before. The next day was Thanksgiving. And
you would watch that.
You're a Lions guy. Yeah.
Dude, you'd watch that and you'd wake up in the morning and smell the bird cooking. And then you'd watch the Lions and John Madden and Pat Summerall. It was awesome.
I was just, you're going to bed watching wrestling, waking up and the house smells like mashed potato, stuffing, and turkey. And then, I'm turning on the TV and it's Barry Sanders and Pat Summerall and John. Man, it was just it's so much better.
It's phenomenal. But yeah, I mean, so like between those two, it's really kind of a toss up. I would lean towards offensive line just because there's been so many misses over the years for these day 2 wide receivers. But that doesn't mean that the Bills will not hit on one if they took one. Like the 2 guys you mentioned, Jalen McMillan, Jalen Polk, I think they're very close in the grading. And I could see either one being potentially the guy there at 60 for the Bills.
I go back and forth all the time on which one I like more. And because the one that threw it really for me was McMillan was the 2 going into this year. He got banged up and that kind of helped Polk emerge a little bit.
Yep.
But if you go back to the 2022 tape, Jalen McMillan is the hard 2 in that offense. And he's got a couple reps against Oregon where he's given it to Christian Gonzalez. And you and I both loved Christian Gonzalez last year. He was my CB1. I thought he was phenomenal. Great pick for New England. He's going up and like high point in the football and wrestling it away from like Christian Gonzalez. And like, so 2022 Jalen McMillan is still in my head of what he can be. 2023 he was banged up and they used him more in the slot once he came back. Like, and I go back and forth of who I like more between him and Polk. And it's also funny that they have the same first name, but it's spelled differently. They're different kinds of players. Like it's, man, also that offense, like Penix, Odunze, McMillan, Polk. I like Jack Westover, the tight end. I like Dylan Johnson. Like you got like Troy Fautanu, like at tackle. Like that offense was just wild.
Rosengarten. I mean,
I forgot about Rosengarten. Good late value. Yeah.
Like, Rosengarten might be a first round pick. I mean, Mel Kiper in his latest mock draft had him going like 31st to San Francisco.
Did he really?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
If he's putting him in there,
he's hearing something. Yeah. That's also a big thing too. Like just to hit it really quickly, like some of these mocks come out from these people. And I know like a lot of fans will be like, this mock sucks. Like, Timmy so-and-so in the first round. These guys who are connected like that, these mocks aren't necessarily like, this is who we think should go. This is what they're hearing and what they're like putting pen to paper because of the inside knowledge that they have. So if there's some kind of smoke like that, now that might not mean that Rosengarten goes in the first, but it could be a sign that teams value him with like a round 2 type of grade. And that means he might be gone by the time round 3 starts. And so it's a guy you maybe just kind of perk up on your radar a little bit. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, he's got a name of a Chicago Cubs pitcher, so it works out perfect. I mean, that's every time I'm like Rosengarten. I mean, what in the world? But with Jalen Polk, I want to say this, like if they're looking for a potential Gabe Davis replacement, I think he might be that guy. Like when you look at measurables, they're very similar in a way. Gabe Davis was a little bit heavier. Polk's a step faster. I mean, but Davis ran, 4.54 40. Polk ran a 4.52.
I thought Polk was going to run faster. I was thinking I wasn't expecting good 4.4s, but I was thinking like 4.49, 4.48 ish. But
I said the same thing. I think on whatever the app is, me and my degenerate self, I think they had him at like 4.46. I took him under and I was so disappointed.
Of course you bet. Of course you're betting on 40s. You just such.
I research this for a living. I have to.
I know that's true. And
but no,
I hate that you also like make a living with it now too. It's just like feeding it even more. Like of course
feed the beast, baby.
Yeah, it's just so wild.
Yeah, but like Polk, he's he provides positional versatility. I think he can play inside, outside. I think he was used in motion, I thought, a lot, and it forced some rotations, like with displacing linebackers and nickels and stuff like that. So I think if like you're trying to get Stephon Diggs one-on-one, you can move Polk, and he's going to catch the ball in the short areas. He's strong enough to run after the catch, but he's not fast enough to always run after the catch. So you got to take the good with the bad with him. He got a late second for me. I think the drops were a little bit of a concern when I watched him against Stanford. I think he lacks, explosiveness. I don't think he's real threatening there, but I like Polk. I think he makes sense for Buffalo. I'm with you on McMillan. The way 2022 looked for him compared to 2023, I know the injury plays a part. Same way I felt with like Olu Fashanu. You watch Fashanu in 2022, absolute stud. You watch him in 2023, he's going through the motions. He looks lethargic. He looks, I don't know if it's out of shape. I don't know if it's because he was banged up. I don't know. The way he
was in 2022, like I would have thought there was no way anybody was going to come close to touching him. In this year. And now you're sitting there and people are like, well, all could be number 1. Mims could be number 2, or it could, some people like
could make it to 20. He might make it to the Steelers, man. Like that's a legit thing. I don't think he makes it past the Saints because of everything that's going on with them in the offensive tackles.
I just saw this stuff today with Ryan Ramczyk. Like they don't think his knee's going to be healthy for this. Like I love Ryan Ramczyk. He's such a good, and it just sucks that they've been snake bit the last 7-8 years. Like Armstead got hurt a bunch before he left, and then Ramczyk now, and Andres Pete was always getting banged up. Like they got screwed against the Rams in the NFC Championship with that non-interference call. Like I just don't know what is going on with like the water in New Orleans. Like it's just absolutely wild. Sorry, continue.
No, you're good. I think there's just a lot of bourbon or something down there that these guys are just getting banged up. But
it's all the beads. All the beads are getting thrown in the water, and everybody's leading to everybody getting injured and banged up.
The beads always makes me think of when I was in Mobile for the first time, and I'm with Eric Turner, and they're like, yeah, there's a Mardi Gras parade. And we go, and we're like getting these beads thrown at us. And I'm like, I'm not lifting my shirt. I don't know what to do. I'm not seeing anything. Like what's going on? But
what's happening? That was the biggest surprise to me of going down to Mobile last year for the first time was like that Mardi Gras started there. And I was like, oh, like I just always associated it with New Orleans. But also too, like Mobile's close to New Orleans. It's all in like the Gulf, like geographically.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's like one of that and how good the food is, like everywhere we go to, is just what I was not expecting whatsoever. But yeah,
It's mind blowing. But other receivers for round 2, and I don't have a second round grade on him. I have a third round grade, but he is one of my favorite day 2 players. That's Jamari Thrash out of Louisville. You guys know I'm going to talk about him. He's I mean, like, we talk about savvy route runners, right? Like Lad McConkey, or was it McConkey or Pearsall you labeled as a professional route runner? McConkey?
But you could apply that to Ricky Pearsall too. Like, they're both just so good. They run their routes differently, but they're just, yeah, man. Lad runs his routes like he's been in the NFL for like 9 years. He just looks like that type of dude.
He looks like the dude that is up for 14 hours watching release packages and finding ways to beat the opponent. And I wouldn't be surprised if Jamari Thrash kind of did that too. I wouldn't say he's a professional route runner, but I would say he's an experienced route runner. And I think he can run the entire route tree. He's got great burst and pacing within his routes. He makes some really good adjustments on some back shoulder throws. He did that at the Senior Bowl. And when you're looking at, a receiver that is 5'11", 188 pounds, he runs, a sub 4.5 at 4.46. I think you can work with that. You're looking for like a number 3, a number 2, number 3, maybe a number 4 receiver, which is what it sounds like the Bills are doing. I think Thrash makes a lot of sense. Now, the drops are concerning. He's had 17 of them in his career. So that's obviously a concern. I think he struggles with more physicality at the line of scrimmage. But I mean, what receiver doesn't? Let's be honest. Like, a lot of guys do. So I think if they feel like Thrash makes sense, I think Polk, Thrash, McMillan, any of those guys at 60 would be great to just slide into this offense. And really, the production and the expectation would be, I think, a lot more realistic than when you took that receiver in the first round.
I like Thrash, especially with what he can do in the underneath and the intermediate. And this is going to sound like such a stupid thing to praise someone for, but he's probably like the best hitch or like sit route runner in the entire class. He just has this ability to sell vertical, and then he sinks his hips, and it's 2 steps, and he opens up, and the corner is running past the marker, and he just created like 5-6 yards of separation. He did it. I watched him do it against Notre Dame. I watched him do it in the rain against Pitt. I watched him do it against Indiana. Like, it doesn't matter who's covering him. Like, he takes off, and his eyes and body language are making you think, uh-oh, this dude's going up the sideline. Yeah. And as soon as those corners turn and open up those hips, he's taking that large step and sinking his hips, and he's popping it out. Like, I just like what he does. I liked him in Mobile too. You and I were talking about him on, I think, day 1 or at the end of afternoon in day 1 or day 2, just sitting there. And yeah, like, I like his tape. And it's funny too, like, there's just so many receivers that keep coming through. And obviously, like, they're not all going to be hits. Like, it's impossible for like all of these receivers in this super deep class, but the odds of them hitting are, I think, higher than most years. And it's just wild, like, what you could potentially get in this class and in this group. And let's stick with that conversation. Go ahead.
I was going to just add, I haven't brought up one player, but to just kind of put the nail in the coffin on Jamari Thrash, seeing him in Buffalo running hitch seam concepts with Stephon Diggs would be phenomenal. I think it would be awesome. Him running the hitch on the outside, Diggs up the seam, chef kiss. And then the other player in the second round I haven't talked about, maybe you're about to bring him up, but Roman Wilson would love to see him. I just don't think he's going to be there. I think he's going to go a lot sooner than people think. There's so much to like about him. He's a guy that you hear checks a lot of boxes. His work ethic is outstanding. And you think of like teams looking for maybe like that next Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm not saying he's Amon-Ra St. Brown, that type of player, but the work ethic, like what he had to do to get to school in Hawaii. The dude was getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, getting on an airplane and flying across the island to go to school. Like, that's some dedication to your craft. And he goes to Michigan and has all this success. He has a huge year this year. So I think when you look at
the Senior Bowl, was phenomenal at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, like, Lad McConkey gets a lot of praise. Ricky Pearsall gets a lot of praise for his release package and route running and the lateral movement skills that those guys have. But Roman Wilson is up there too. So I think that there's a really nice blend of round 2 guys. And I just had to throw some shout out to Roman Wilson, even though he's a Michigan guy. But I think there's a lot to love with his run after the catch ability and just the fluid route running ability that he has.
I hate Roman Wilson, not because of Roman Wilson, but because to watch, like to get a good sample size of Roman Wilson, you have to watch like 7 games because they run the ball so much at Michigan. Like his targets, right? I'm going to give you every single game in his targets from the first game to the last. 8, 5, 3, 5, 4, 4, 4, 4, 11, 0 against Penn State where he got banged up. Maryland 1.
Well, then they ran in the second half.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Maryland 1, Ohio State 6, Iowa 3, Bama 4, Washington 4. He had 67 targets on the year. So, like, just to get a good sample size, like you start with that Purdue game because you're like, oh, okay, like this dude out here, he got like 11 targets, 9 catches. Cool. That's his most targeted game. And then everything else you're trying to like scrap together reps. Same thing for like, who I really like. I like Marshawn Lloyd from USC. But he was banged up and then he's in a rotation. So I've had to watch like so many USC games to get the tape from Lloyd. Like I can't just get like 4 games where there's this heavy workload. I'm out there watching like 7 and 8 because the reps are so minimal.
Yeah. That's like the Louisville guy. Not Jawar Jordan, but the other guy.
Oh,
like
Garendo.
Yeah, dude, I put on one of his games. He was in the backfield like 10 times. Didn't touch the ball 1 time.
Dude,
I go,
the first game I was watching Thrash against Notre Dame. Because Jordan does really well in that game against Notre Dame. And the whole time I kept being like, and I wasn't watching for the running backs, but I was like, where's Garendo? Like, where is he? And then he'd like go in for a snap and then be out for like 50 snaps in a row. Yeah, it's just so tough to try. That guys not getting like the reps and me having to grab multiple games drives me nuts in the same way that teams that have bad angles for their all 22, like Washington is a great example. Washington's camera is like on a friggin' satellite on the moon. It is so zoomed out. It pisses me off.
It's so hard to spot those receivers sometimes. It drives me insane.
And that's the other option too that I hate. Players.
I wonder why their offensive coordinator left.
That's right. Horrible angles. Guys not differentiating themselves. And that's also too, like watching on tape. Do something different. Wear a different color arm sleeve. Wear different color cleats. I hate guys that are like look the same. Like they all have single digit numbers. So the camera's far away, and I'm like, I don't know who number 1 is versus number 4 because the font is a certain way. None of them are wearing an arm sleeve. They're all wearing black gloves and black cleats. I don't know who is who. Like it's just like that's why I appreciated Thrash. Thrash for most games is wearing the arm sleeve on his left elbow, and no one else is doing it. And it's a white arm sleeve. And I'm like, okay. I recognize you're like certain, like Javon Baker always has the t-shirt hanging out a little bit and the towel and the arms. I'm like, okay, I can put it all together. I hate where I have to, I need the aesthetic. Like 1, you look good, you play good, but 2, it's really a pain in the ass to watch the tape when I don't know who is who. And I have to wait until I get the end zone angle and see the number. And then I got to go back to the sideline angle, bro. It's just first world problems. It's just really, it's just really, really, really tough. Let's continue some of the conversation as we start to hit our last segment here. So round 1 and round 2 dominoes is how I phrase this. So let's play. We'll go 2 options. You talked about one a little bit, but let's say if the Bills go receiver in round 1, what are you looking at them to address in round 2? Again, based on the team, but also based on what we think the board is going to look like at 60, how things are going through.
I think like, as much as I would like to see them go get that pass rusher, I mean, I think you have to go find the interior offensive line. You have to get somebody. I know it's a good interior offensive line class, and I know it's a good offensive tackle class, but like if Cedric Van Pran is your guy, who reminds me a little bit of Lloyd Cushenberry, like in a light way, he's kind of maxed out at 298 pounds, but at the same time, like you bring him in, you might be able to plug and play him a little bit. Maybe he sits for a little while, whatever. I think you can go that route. Is Cooper Beebe there? If he is, I mean, he's got really short arms. That's a bit of a concern. But I think he's probably going to be gone. But if he's there,
I watched him giving the business to Byron Murphy. They had a good battle, Kansas State versus Texas. And I actually think Beebe won that battle more often. I thought he was going to come out last year. You and I were both bummed when he didn't come out last year. I like Cooper Beebe a lot. Sorry, continue.
No, I'm with you. I'm bummed that he didn't come out either because I could have had him on the show, interviewed him, the whole thing would have been great, and then he unfollowed me. But whatever, it is what it is.
Not bitter about it. Whatever.
I'm not salty about it. But yeah, so I just think getting offensive line help is important, and it's something that they need to do. I think it's a need. That's why I talked about it so much in the first round. I don't think Zach Frazier is going to be there. So that's why I kind of push for him in the first round. But if they went that wide receiver route, you have to kind of pivot and in the second round and prepare for the next wave of offensive linemen, because, there is that drop off from 60 all the way down to the next pick. So
128.
You might not find a starting center that low in the draft. Like, you just might not. So I think that's important. And if you can get that depth now, cool. You can get pass rushers. You can get guys to get in there situationally. You can get interior defensive line help to bring in situational guys if you feel confident that Jones can be, first and second down. And obviously you have Ed Oliver, and you can kind of get that blend. And then again, the situational pass rushers that you can bring in. So I think that they can do a little bit more with the defensive line and even in the secondary, where I think at, wide receiver, interior offensive line, just doing this conversation, that's the domino effect that I would have if I'm the Bills. And that would be what I'm hoping for kind of falls into my lap, that you can go and get receiver, offensive line.
And then, so let's flip it on its head, which we talked about a little bit, so we don't have to elaborate too much. If the Bills don't go wide receiver in round 1, does that mean that they should and or will go receiver in round 2? Like, do you think, because again, so talking to that point, after pick 60, your next pick is pick 128. And then again, it comes in bunches. You've got 128, you've got 133, so on and so forth. But that's 68 players between 60 and 128. And that's a bunch of receivers that are going bye-bye.
I mean, looking at the way that they've structured this roster, I wouldn't be surprised if they passed on it. I'll be honest. I mean, like, you signed Curtis Samuel to a pretty decent sized deal. You saw the emergence of Shakir. You have Diggs. We talked about his contract. The only way you're getting rid of him is if it's toxic. You brought in a veteran like Mac Hollins. Like, to me, that's them showing the cards and saying, hey, the wide receivers are going to go early. We know we're not going to get one at 28 unless we trade up and get one. We feel confident enough in this room to where, okay, if we have to take one at 60, cool, but more than likely, we're probably going to take them in that 120 range or package something and move up into, like, let's say 95 or whatever, getting that top 100.
Where they should have had their comp pick. Sorry, continue.
No, I agree. I agree with you, but I think that's more realistic. And I think at that point, if they, let's say, did offensive line in the first round, I think then they would look at secondary or defensive line in round 2. And that's how I would picture it. And it might be, you start in the trenches. They might have to hit the reset. A few years ago, it looked like they were trying to do that, when they took Russo and then they took Carlos Basham, and
we were doing that show live together
and like they were trying to build into the trenches for now. And it didn't necessarily work out completely. You found some, you didn't find others. Now they kind of got to get back into doing that and find those guys. And hopefully they can do it in this draft, because that's just the way it works. Again, I don't know. It might not work. It might be receiver. The way this roster is structured, and I look at every single team religiously, like, every single day. And when I look at the Bills, I see just the holes at interior offensive line, corner, interior defensive line, and you throw in a pass rusher and a receiver. That's how I would label it. So do you think they surprise anybody by, like, going and just getting a running back? Like, that's not in the cards, right? Like, that's not
I think on day 3, if they keep all these picks, you're 100% going to see a running back, because you've got Ty Johnson, you've got Cook. They have a propensity for, Zach Moss was a 3, Devin Singletary was a 3, James Cook was a 2. They love their day 2 running backs. I just don't think they can afford it.
That's why I brought that up.
I know 100%. Like, I'm in lockstep with you. I just really think this year they can't afford it. I think you'll see one, though, on day 3, just given cost control, term, all of that aspect. Like, you're sitting a guy and you take him in round 4 or round 5, and that means you get him for 40 years, and you're pairing him with these next 2 years of James Cook, and maybe he takes over for Cook after if you don't give him a second contract. Like, I think they will take a running back. Again, especially, I think the sweet spot for running backs this year is like rounds 3 through 5, like, based on who's there. There's not too many like, oh, this guy's a top 50 lock or this guy's a top 100 lock. There's so many, like, random skill set dudes. Like, I like Dylan Lowby. Like, I like Rasheen Ali. Like, so many guys who I just think are so cool. But I think they'll get one just on day 3. Man, they would piss everyone off so much if they went like Zach Frazier in like round 1, and then like Marshawn Lloyd at 60. Like, oh my God, everybody would
But
be so
it
mad.
would make sense. I mean, dude, it would make sense, dude. I'm sorry. I know that would piss people off, but it would make sense. Like now, if they forced their hand and took like Dewan Edwards, who I think is I think he's a pretty damn good running back. Personally, I think there's some limitations with his game, but I'm not.
I love Marshawn Lloyd, and I even like Edwards too to a degree. They could not take a running back at 60. Like, and I'm pro running back,
Okay,
and I'm pro Lloyd.
But what if that run of receivers happen and they're like, all right,
That's
the only
fine.
way we
There's
can.
probably a good offensive line. I mean, okay, so then they took Frazier in the first round. Okay, that's fine. Like, what does edge look like? What does safety look like? What does corner look
It all
like?
depends, but
Because if that run at receiver happened, then I have a feeling is KAD there at 60? Like, then I feel like one of these corners fell and I'm sitting there at 60.
Right? Yeah.
Correct. Like somebody from someone from a more premium position has fallen. And then I'm sitting there going, okay, like there's no way the best player available mixed with the need and value is a running back at 60. As much as I love Marshawn Lloyd. But again, I'm also, this is a conversation for another time as well. Like, I'm also a big proponent of like, I want the Bills to run the ball and throw and do downfield play action shots with Josh Allen, who has a cannon. And then when you want to, spread everybody out and just put them in hell and put them in a blender. But with this offensive line and with Allen as the quarterback, power run game and bootlegs and shots off of it, like where Allen is just, you adjust the line and you move the pocket and Allen can send moonshots. And if not, he's got space to run or he's just trying to shake a linebacker or a defensive end out.
Right.
Exactly. Like I want that, especially with how many issues they've had with generating explosives out of their regular drop back game.
Right.
Let's just do it the old school way and just make everybody suck up to play the run. And now we're taking moonshots down the field. But man, just from watching the world burn, if they went running back at 60, oh my God, I cannot imagine.
If they take a running back at 60, whatever stream is happening on Cover One, I'm getting on right then and there.
Bro,
and
I'm battening down the hatches. I'm treating everything like it's The Walking Dead. I'm putting up 2x4s on the windows. Like, nah, I'm turning all the lights off. Like, I don't want to be.
I'm getting a 1-pie pizza. I'm getting the hell out of here.
I'll already have a 1-pie pizza, but I'm hunkering down and you're not going to hear or see from me for a long time because I do not want to be caught in the crossfire for those people. Couple last pieces before we head out here. Deepest position in this class and shallowest position or positions in this class. You get a multiple for the deepest, multiple for shallowest. What do you got? We'll start with the deepest. Is there one that's head and shoulders above the other? Is there 2 or 3? What do you got for the deepest position or positions in this class?
Yeah, I mean, deepest is offensive line. I've reiterated it. I mean, that's just
especially when you put the whole piece together, like tackle and interior pieces, center included. Obviously, like there's so much quality at the offensive line spot this year in this draft.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, you're going to probably see between those two right there. We're probably going to see close to 25, maybe 30 go. I mean, let's be honest. Like, there's a lot there. There's probably even more. It's probably more than that. It's probably like 45. I mean, it's up there. It's a number.
It's going to be a lot. Yeah.
It's going to be a lot. Next would be then wide receiver. I would just say from deep, just from watching the tape. I don't know who's all going to transition to successful players at the next level, but we'll leave that conversation for another day. Shallowest by far, tight end. Tight end is
good call.
I've said linebacker. The more I watch, like,
real quick, who's your tight end 2? Sanders?
Yeah,
who's your tight end 3?
Theo Johnson.
Oh, okay, from Penn State. Okay, fair.
And then that there's just a drop off. I mean,
and then I just don't care anymore.
I've never.
I like Ben Sinnott from Kansas State a lot. I really do. But obviously, I'm not sitting there being like, oh man, first round guy. But like, I wouldn't be mad if my team took Sinnott on day 2.
I like Cade Stover. I mean, like he's okay. He's kind of forgotten about, but
absolutely.
It's just one of those things. It's like, I love watching tight ends. I love being able to watch guys that can go out, catch football, block. Like, you get the best of both worlds when you watch tight ends. And I always enjoy breaking them down and like going through summer study and fall and all that. Like, there just wasn't much there. And then like earlier, and I might've said it on this show, like I brought up linebackers, but like the more I dive into them, I think you can find some feasible ones. Peyton Wilson, Edgerrin Cooper, who I love. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. is okay.
I
Junior
like Bertrand, boy from the Senior Bowl, who you interviewed. Like,
Yeah.
I think he's going to be a day 3 dude. Like, I
Yep.
like what he offers. He's calling that ND defense. He's adjusting everybody. He's penetrating. He's smart. Like, he had a
Go back to
great.
like 2020, 2021 when he was with Kyle Hamilton. Dude, he was playing it like
Oh,
this.
that's right.
He played like
That's
this
right.
shell role.
I
It's the
forgot.
weirdest. You have to go see it. It's the weirdest thing
I remember
in the
watching it
world.
on broadcast. I wasn't watching the tape at the time, but I forgot that. And then again, this is also kind of the insider piece as well. Like, I remember you showing us what you speaking with him like after practice that Wednesday when we were at the seafood spot. It just, his answer to you was so great and so smart and so in detail and in depth. And it wasn't like he struggled to give that answer. It was just effortless. Yep, exactly. Like he impressed. I liked him at the Senior Bowl. I liked him even more when you like interviewed him, and then just he just flashes on the tape. Like when I'm usually not watching for Notre Dame's defense. I'm watching for whoever they're playing offense against. But I just keep seeing 27 making plays like left and right, and he's just so smart. But there is some value at linebacker too. That's fair.
Yeah, and then another one is a UCLA kid, Darius Muasu. I think I'm saying that correctly.
Is he 53?
Yes.
He's all over the friggin' place, just popping dudes sideline to sideline, penetrating. Yep. I noticed him yesterday when I was watching Latu and Murphy, and I'm mad at myself because I told myself I was like, look up 53, and I completely forgot until right now. Yeah, he's just popping dudes left and right.
Dude, yep. He a little bit undersized. He's like 5'11", 225. He didn't run fast. Like he ran like a 4.7, 4.75, somewhere in that range.
Fast on tape. He's going sideline to sideline against like bubble screens. Like dudes are catching it behind the line, and before they get 5 yards downfield, he's meeting them and beelining them and burying them.
Yep. And I think with this new kickoff rule and stuff like that, and the special teams value that we're looking for in the NFL now, that's now coming back as everything comes full circle back to the NFL. Special teams actually matters.
Time is a flat circle.
Yeah. But he would be a guy that like I could see the Bills taking some interest in, just simply because of kind of the athletic profile, but at the same time, the special teams value. I think bringing in another linebacker doesn't hurt this team by any means, just because of Milano just being banged up from time to time and those types of things. So I don't know. I think, the shallowest position is tight end, and we got on the linebacker thing just because I said, I think on this show that linebacker was the more shallow position originally.
Yes.
But now that I'm through a lot of the final evaluations, tight end is by far.
That's fair. I'm in a similar boat as well. All right, Russ, last question. I think I phrased it to you. What 3 things do the Bills need to come away with from this draft? But it could be a big one now. It could be 2. It could be 3. It could be multiple. We've talked about a bunch here. What do the Bills need to come away with from this draft? Is it a player type? Is it these specific positions and addressing certain things? We've hit so much, but if you had to rank like this one thing or these top 2 or these top 3 for you, that outsider analysis perspective, what do the Buffalo Bills need to come away with from this 2024 draft?
Interior offensive line is number 1 by far. I think I always take the scenic route with my answers. I can't just give you 3 positions and move on with life.
I like it. I like the context. I like the detail.
I need the detail. Interior offensive line. I think it's important to get a young piece in the middle of the offensive line, especially just throwing center out there. If you can find an upgrade there, do it. It's worth the first round pick. You get the 5th-year option potentially. Pairing that with Josh Allen, like you just look at the success of a lot of quarterbacks, and there might even be a piece that I wrote on Cover One years ago talking about this, the importance of the center position and looking at some of the teams. And this was back in like 2019. So like you saw Ryan Kelly go early. He was there to be paired with Andrew Luck. Obviously, Luck retired. You see it with Frank Ragnow. He was brought in for Matthew Stafford. Obviously, Jared Goff has him, but when Ragnow's not in, we saw it earlier this year, that offense struggled in Detroit. I think the thing is
even Mitch Morse for Patrick Mahomes early on, like you pair those young centers where those established centers either in like high priority pick or a veteran guy to boost with those QBs.
And you lost him now, and like even if he didn't play at certain times for the Bills last year or years prior, The impact is felt. It is felt. Like, I don't care what you watch on film and how you want to tell you, like, oh, it's okay, the
No,
backup's doing fine.
his film is real. No, he's awesome. It's
Yeah.
just a decent enough cap number, some concussion stuff. I think maybe they moved him more because they're trying to move to a different type of interior. Like they want more like depth of the pocket security and more anchoring, which is a strength of McGovern and moving towards center. But honestly, like if you take Frazier as a good anchorer, and there really isn't anything that JPJ can't do. So like it's an upgrade, like either way.
Yeah. So I think that's when you make a move like that and you move on from a guy like that, to me, that's just, I don't want to say it's a red flag, but it's like, hey, that's a light shining in my eye. I'm going to pay attention to that one. So that's why I put Frazier and interior offensive line up there. Next for me would be defensive back. I just look at this team, and if you can find somebody that can help make a difference and not just put it all on, the trade for Douglas or the signing of Edwards, like you're putting a lot of pressure on guys that don't have anything beyond this year. Sure, you could bring them back, but we don't know what the plan is and we don't know what's going to be offered. And those guys might bet on themselves and say, hey, I want a bigger deal. Especially Edwards. Hey, I took the 1-year deal already. I'm not taking another 1-year deal. I'm going to go get 3 years for 15 million from the Chargers or whatever. So I think defensive back makes a lot of sense, whether it's safety or corner. And then the last one, I'm going to go with interior defensive line. I think you have kind of a well-established interior defensive line, but you can make it better. And if you can, again, I would almost interchange them in interior offensive line at times. Like if you can go get Johnny Newton, cool. If you can go get Zach Frazier, cool. But those are the 2 guys on the wish list for me on the Bills. And if you can go get that guy, great. If you don't get Newton because he's gone, or you like Frazier more and you feel like, okay, at pick 120, I'm going to get, an interior defensive lineman. Is that Michael Hall? Is that, is that the root kid out of Clemson? Is there somebody else that you can get in that position? Cool. I think though you have to add those 3 spots to really help your team. I know the sexy pick is receiver, but the way that roster is shaped, I don't see it. I just don't see it.
And I think that's fair. And I appreciate the way you see things. And I appreciate you riding with me. Man, I really thought I was like, yeah, we'll probably come in like an hour and a half here. Here we are.
Not me, dude. We're always 2 hours. That's how we roll.
I should have known. We'll throw up the banner that says Toodles, folks, because we are going to start to wind down here. Russ, before I do my, closing thoughts, and if anyone has, obviously still in here for the live viewers, if you have not already, please, and thank you, drop a like on this video. It goes a sincerely long way towards helping myself and the entire team to track and trend in front of more eyes and ears here on YouTube. So if you have not already, please drop a like on this video, or if you're watching post live later as well, please drop a like on this video. But Russ, you were tremendous as always. Before I kind of do the parting words for everyone, floor is yours. Tell them who you are, what you do, where they can find you, anything and everything. The floor is yours to, spread your work.
Yeah, no, well, first and foremost, always appreciate it. Always love coming on. It's like when you send the text, I'm like, I don't even know why you asked. Just say, hey, Tuesday, you're coming on. Like it's an automatic yes. No, so it's always great being able to do this. Always love, getting back here with Cover One and having some fun talking ball. We'll do it anytime, any place. But yeah, coming up, Fantasy Pros. I got a mock draft 3.0 that should drop within the next couple of days, by the weekend for sure. It'll be on Twitter at Russ NFL Draft. My prospect rankings for quarterback, running back, and receiver is in the works. My big board should be, finalized as far as top 101 players, my draft guide and all that as well. That will all be released together. It should be done by next. It's essentially done, but all the editing and the finishing touches and all that, it'll be out within the next week, maybe 2, just simply because of any graphic delays or anything like that. But to see it all, you go to fantasypros.com. You can also go to lionswire.com if you want to learn about the Lions and see some of the stuff I'm writing about over there, or just follow along at Russ NFL Draft on X. So I appreciate it as always, my man.
Yeah, you were phenomenal. It's also nice that we're boys at this point. So I appreciate you as a person, but your work, that's really where it all started. Like your knowledge of the X's and O's and just being able to talk ball with you and bring you on. And especially when it comes to the draft pieces, like your prospect evaluation and analysis is always top tier. And I always tell myself this year to remember it too. Like you've been one of the most like accurate mock drafters like the past several years. Like you keep grinding it out. Like you knock that stuff out of the park. So it's always a joy when I can find the time to get you on and when you can find the time to join me. But apparently it's automatic. I just say the word and you're there. And that's usually how it works out. So I appreciate the hell out of you. Everybody give Russ a follow again on Twitter at Russ NFL Draft. He is 1000% worth the follow. Get yourself some One Pie Pizza. Like I mentioned in the beginning, the show, of course, sponsored by the best pizza in Buffalo, New York. Delicious sweet sauce pie, cup and char pepperoni, homemade blue cheese. They have a ton of drives and initiatives and pieces they do in the city of Buffalo, so they're good for the community as well. Partnering with Roswell to try and knock out cancer. Partnering with the SPCA, the Alzheimer's Foundation, Toys for Tots come holiday season. They're good people making great food. So treat yourself to some One Pie Pizza and do some good for the community while you are at it. Tell them Cover One in Disguise Coverage sent you. They also have a pizza that they named after the brand. It's the Cover One Allen Goat. I can't even describe the ingredients. It's goat cheese, and I don't even want to spoil it. It's phenomenal. It's absolutely tremendous. So go get yourself some One Pie Pizza as soon as possible. If you have not already, please, and thank you, drop a like on this video here on YouTube. If you're listening on one of the podcasting apps or platforms, that's cool too. Please rate and review and subscribe to Disguise Coverage on those platforms. Turn on notifications for Disguise Coverage here on YouTube. Tell your family and friends and loved ones about how awesome this show is. If you liked this show, word of mouth is tremendous. If you hated this show, tell your enemies about it and try and ruin their day by making them watch it. Appreciate you folks tremendously, especially for all those who rode with us live here on this episode. We had a ton of engagement back and forth with each other, back and forth with myself and Russ. Thank you folks very much for joining in and tuning in live. If you didn't watch live, that's cool too. Thank you for your post-live view or your listen, download on the audio platforms. Any and every ounce of support is tremendously appreciated by myself and the entire team here at Cover One. Thank you very much for tuning into this episode. I will see you tomorrow night for another episode of the Cover One Film Room, Wednesday, March 27th, 7 p.m. Eastern, and then another episode of Disguise Coverage next Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern, as always. Until then, that'll do it for me here on this show and for Russ as well. Major thank you to Russ for crushing it. Again, thank you to all you people and all the kindness and thoughts and words and clicks and all that kind of stuff. Thank you very much. I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well and staying safe. Be kind to one another. Take care of one another. I will see you tomorrow for the film room or next Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern for another episode of Disguise Coverage. Until then, as always, Godspeed.